Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great and I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you want early access to my videos, then make sure you check out my Patreon in the description and make sure you check out my podcast in the description below. I have a quick message before the story starts, so I'd like to share this. Just remember, if you're overcoming any struggles in life or struggling with your mental health, it's important to be consistent and remember that it's a process and it's not linear, so you're always going to have ups and downs. But what will get you better is being consistent in doing the things that make you better. Try not to feel too unmotivated during hardships and try not to let it demotivate you from doing what you need to do to get better. And don't feel like you're a failure if you have bad times with it. It's completely normal. It's the strength to continue which counts and to not give up. And I believe in you and that you can overcome anything in front of you. So I hope everyone's doing great and enjoys these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. One of the weirdest things that happened while working as a park ranger was something I heard on the radio one time. There was a distress call coming from an unknown situation, and somebody was literally screaming for their life over the radio, saying that it's coming, it's coming. Every time that the responder made contact, they kept saying, I don't know what it is, but it's a dark figure that's chasing me. God, why is it so tall? This went on and off for a horrifying 3 or 4 minutes until eventually there was complete silence. It turned out the call was being made by a hiker who was literally never seen again after this happened and virtually vanished without a trace. The following is not my own story but my father's, so I'm going to share it to you how he's explained it to me. So, my father worked as a fire ranger for quite a long time, and this is his story. So basically, he was on duty as usual, and this often meant much time on his own out in the wilderness, something that he didn't really have a problem with. He was constantly on lookout for fires or even the slightest signs of one. He said that earlier in the day he had a strange feeling that something was about to happen, but he couldn't quite figure out exactly what it was, and he was never able to shake the feeling. Well, it gets to nighttime, which actually makes it a lot easier to spot fires, and just off to a bridge that my dad's familiar with, he spots the signs of fire. You can see a flame, but weirdly, it's joined by a few others. What's most strange of all is that they all seem to be moving slightly. Now this seems odd. It's clearly not a natural fire, and it doesn't appear to be somebody starting one as the fire's not grown, so my dad just watches very intently with the binoculars. He said he does this for a good minute or so before he decides that he should probably head down now and investigate what is actually happening. He says as he's walking closer and closer to the site, he can hear a strange kind of chanting. He can't really make out any words, but he's unsure whether he's gone across some kind of Native American thing that he didn't know about, and maybe it's a residual haunting or what it is. But then he takes a look closer with the binoculars. He can see a group of about 10 or 12 people, all dressed exactly the same, chanting, standing in a circle with their torches. My dad very quickly turns around and gets back up into the station. He quickly reports in what he's seeing and then makes a report to the police. The police showed up about 30 or 40 minutes later due to the distance that they had to cover, and of course, they were long gone by the time the police got there. They still went out to investigate, and they found the remains of multiple animals and animal blood everywhere in that area. Now what's strangest of all is that they found wrote in blood on a piece of paper, "We know you're watching us." And after that, my dad quit that area immediately and didn't work as a ranger for a good number of years. He still has no idea to this day who they were or how they could have possibly spotted him in the darkness. He doesn't know how long they knew he was watching them for, or whether they knew he was in the tower, but he said he's never felt as confident being out there since as he did before this happened. A few years ago, I loaded a bunch of camping gear onto my bicycle and spent the better part of the next 7 months riding 5,300 miles around much of the US. At night, I most often preferred to wild camp, simply finding somewhere to disappear to into the woods, somewhere people are unlikely to find me and even less likely to care that I'm there. After a month or so of sleeping in the woods, I'd grown quite accustomed to the many nighttime sounds of the forest. The drowning of thousands of crickets and toads was a certainty, becoming almost a kind of white noise in the end. Now perhaps, maybe, I'd camp near a babbling creek or something similar. But it was always the highlight of the night. Though not particularly uncommon to hear the yipes and howls of distant coyotes. I fondly recall one night I inadvertently set up camp right between two owls who spent much of the night hooting back and forth, and at the very least, it wouldn't take much of a breeze to stir music from the trees. But then, there was one night in late September in the mountains of rural Montana shortly after dusk. I had turned out my light and lay down in the bed before coming to a disturbing realization. It's dead silent. There's no animals to be heard anywhere, not a single cricket. There wasn't even the slightest breeze through the trees, and this is in early autumn. There was just nothing to hear at all. It was terrifying. I can only describe it as the loudest silence I've ever heard. It almost felt as though the entire forest was hiding from an equally silent predator. There was the occasional snapping of a twig near my tent, a common sound normally lost in the canopy of other noises. But it's like a gunshot. I slept terribly that night, and it was incredibly relieving to hear a bird song accompany the first light of dawn. Now, I'm pretty much an accomplished outdoorsman. I'll be honest though, I still have a bit of anxiety when camping wild. I've had a few other similar nights in mind which inspire uneasy feelings, but none that really compared to this one. I think the weirdest part of it all was truly the not knowing. So there was this old lighthouse at the park I worked at as a ranger. People from North Jersey might actually be familiar with such. Next to it sits our visitor centre, formerly the lighthouse keeper's quarters. Last summer, I got put on the graveyard shift for a pay period. While out tooling around the fort, park is an old army base, around 2 AM, changing all the Pokemon gyms to Team Mystic. So basically I noticed there was a light on in the second floor of the quarters. One of the interp rangers must have forgot to turn it off, I said to myself. So I go to head in, do a quick sweep of the building and turn it off. I go back outside, get in my car and I'm about to drive away. When I look back to the second floor, the light is back on and something moves across the window. My mind's eye saw a human figure, but I noped out of there so quick that it could have just been a bat or something, but I guess I'll never know. So, I was looking for new, out-of-the-way fishing holes. If I'm on a trip and have my gear, I'll pull out a map and look at different connecting waterways and try to find back roads that lead to new spots that few people know about. On one trip about 10 years ago, I'm in Western PA and looking for a road to connect me with this small and out-of-the-way stream that I found on the map. I'm in the country. It's not too desolate, but the houses are definitely getting further and further apart and looking more and more beat up. I summarise that I am really close to where this stream is supposed to be, so I turn down a dirt road that leads towards a tree line in the direction that I believe the stream is. The road starts out okay, but as soon as I pass into the tree line things get weird. It's mid-afternoon, but the canopy of trees is so thick that it suddenly looks like it's dusk. The roads are very desolate. and start closing in and eventually vanish. There are banks on either side of me, so I'm trying to figure out some kind of way around, seeing if there's a kind of old logging road or something that barely gets used. Now this road that I'm on keeps on getting worse and worse. Large rocks start appearing at random spots in the road, first sporadically and then more frequently. It's very unnatural looking. It looks like they were placed on purpose. Now my car's a 4-wheel drive, but I'm getting a little worried because the rocks are getting larger, and combined with this, how tight the road is, I'm starting to get a little bit worried. I'm now driving very slow to not pop a tyre or make a wrong move and get stuck on the bank or something. The road suddenly takes a very sharp left-hand and downward turn. I creep along this turn, but as I see the road continuing to do this weird trajectory, I get worried. At this moment, my gut starts talking to me and telling me to turn around, but it's at this point I realise I can't. The road is not wide enough to do a 3-point turn. I could chance it, but I don't want to get my front end caught on something pushing over the bank or my back end going off in the other direction. I say to myself, just keep on going. There's going to be enough room. I'll be able to turn around quickly. As I make my way round, there seems to be a side road that I should be able to take, but then I notice something odd. It just looks like garbage, bottles, boxes, wrappers, etc. Then I start seeing toys, kids' toys, and lots of them, an uncomfortable amount. Then I start seeing clothing, some old looking and some more modern. They're very weathered and tattered. The amount of clothes I'm seeing actually increases, and then I start to see mattresses. Not one random mattress, but lots, and all over the place. They are dirty with dark stains on them. My gut is now screaming at me to get out of here and turn around while I can. While I'm sitting there trying to figure out my next move, I get the feeling that I'm being watched. The feeling then hits me and I audibly yell out, "No." I then slam the car in reverse, dodging all of the random rocks and stuff on the way back now, and out of the sharp turn until eventually it levels out again. I say, God, screw this, and risk making the 3-point turn. My back end goes slightly off the bank and I slam back into drive and throw myself forward onto the road and out of whatever the hell I just discovered. I have no clue what I come across that day, but I guess the best case scenario is it was some kind of drug den. But God knows, I still get shivers thinking about it now. So, not my story but my dad's. First off, let me explain that my dad is a huge skeptic. He was a military man for most of his life and doesn't really scare easily. When he was young, my grandparents sent him off to military school. He would grow up there and truthfully spend a lot of time out in the woods around the campus. He and his friends would drink in the woods and camp. So one particular night around the fire, the guys are telling ghost stories and trying to scare each other. The guys laughed off the spooky stories, but my dad said everyone was just a little spooked. Of course no one admits it. So they put out the fire and packed up for the night. The campus was at the top of the hill and the woods are at the bottom. The guys start heading up the hill when my dad felt everyone behind him stop. So my dad looks up to the top of the hill and he can make out someone at the very top, standing on the inside of the fence about 6 feet tall. This thing's head was resting on the top and its arms were hanging over it, almost like it was just resting on it while watching the guys make it to the top of the hill. They all froze. At first they're like, "Oh God, we got caught sneaking out." Then one of my dad's buddies yells out, "Hey, we're just checking out the campus, sir," thinking it's a drill sergeant maybe, but no response came. Well, we're all screwed here, my dad thought. As they get about halfway up the hill, my dad said the hair on the back of his neck stood up. The thing literally hasn't moved or responded whatsoever, it's just stayed there perfectly in place. When all of a sudden it screeched, my dad said it sounded like a mountain lion which they have in the area, but It was clearly coming from this thing. It started to climb the fence, which it did with ease like a spider. The guys wasted no time whatsoever back into the woods screaming and trying to push each other out of the way. My dad hid in a tree with a buddy, and the other guys hid in some bush by the creek. They actually stayed there until the sun came out. My dad said the night was sleepless. They heard branches breaking all night and the same screeching as before. My dad said it is the most scared he's ever been. The guys never really talked about it, and they all agreed what they saw was the same thing. He told me this story once, and I could tell how scared he was just by the manner of which the story was told. So, I went camping with a friend in an area of British Columbia with grizzly bears, black bears and cougars. While sitting at the campfire after sunset as it's getting dark, we heard a sort of grunting/growling noise coming from the bushes not far from our campsite. We ignored the first one or two, but after the noise kept occurring every couple of minutes, it had our attention. We went to look around to see if we could fully identify what was making the noise and hopefully scare it off. The noise then continued for a few minutes and eventually becomes louder. We assume the source of the noise is coming closer to us and the adrenaline is pumping now. It's worth mentioning that we all had a knife on us each, as we'd forgotten to bring bear spray and don't have any guns. The next thing we know, we heard a sound from behind us which I can only describe as an entire tree getting ripped off the ground, split in two and thrown again. Then dead silence. We sprint and climb to get back in the car, peeing ourselves honestly, so scared, peering out into the darkness trying to spot any movement but we don't see any. We never saw a glimpse of whatever made that sound, and the next morning we searched intensely but can't find any signs of what could have caused this. I still have no idea what it was to this day. So I was walking part of the Apparition trail. I come around a corner and see a mum of black bear playing with two cubs. No biggie, I just turn around and go back. I go back around the corner to see the other cub scrounging around on the trail, and suddenly I realise that I've become in between both the mama bear and her cubs. Terrain is too rough to leave the trail. I have to go another way. I might have to jump off a cliff to get away from this. I climb a small cliff and wait for the bears to leave. Now, at one point they're literally 30 feet away from me, eventually wandering off. I have to sit there for over an hour to wait for my heart rate to come down, and I always carry bear spray with me now. I was like 10 or 11 and was in the middle of the woods behind my grandpa's ranch with my two cousins. It was just after lunch and it was light out. We were poking at a dead animal with some sticks when we saw an alien or some kind of monster. I don't know what the hell it was. It was white and had big eyes and tilted its head very slightly when we saw it. I was too busy screaming and running for my life to get a good look at what it was, but that's what I saw, just kind of crouching there by the big tree staring at us, and all three of us saw it. We got back to the ranch and we were all crying and screaming, so my uncle took his shotgun and told us, "Tell him where it is." I didn't want to go back there, and neither did my little cousin, but my older cousin agreed, as long as he could get a shotgun too. So, we went back there, and, of course, there's nothing there. Nobody believes us, and to this day, my uncle insists that we must have seen some kind of animal, but there is no way that's possible, unless it was a deformed hairless monkey. It didn't look like any of those grey or green aliens, really. It was kind of triangular, and the eyes were round. The closest thing I can think of is kind of like a praying mantis. But it was the size of a small child, and its eyes are pure white. Now, I didn't see any limbs or anything like that, but I can remember just how weird this thing looked, and it had a really big head and smallish torso. I don't know what this is, but even thinking of it now freaks me out. Oh, how it feels to be lost in the middle of nowhere with no idea where you are or how to get back. So, I'd like to share you my story. Now, my father was a park ranger, and apparently his dad was too. So my father and grandfather would often lecture me on the dangers of being out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, and how you have to be so careful because you don't know who's out there or what could happen. But me being a younger kid at the time, that did not bother me one bit. My mindset was, well, the further out into the woods I go, the more chance of adventure there's going to be for me. So I'd always like to go wandering off a little further than where I was supposed to go. You know, just kind of like typical kid stuff, I guess. But looking back on it now, it's much, much stupider. And of course, I was kind of blind to any stranger danger at the time. But I digress too much now, so I'd like to get to my story. Now, this isn't set in a beautiful, picturesque summer's day. No, this is set in the middle of a cold October month in winter. Now, at the time I'd finished school, and I wasn't working, and to be honest, I didn't really know what I wanted. I used to work in some old shop somewhere. It was basically a big surplus store, and I really liked the owner and got on with him well there. I worked with him for a little while, but I had to quit because it was God. I can't put into words how bored I would get if I was in the back room on my own. I'd have to do work in there for 2 or 3 hours at a time. The thing was, customers would come in the front, but nobody would really want to talk to me, so I'd get really bored. Now, my grandparents kicked up a riot when I wanted to quit. They kind of still had the more older mindset that you have to keep a job. You don't know how quick they're going to come, but God, working for $6 an hour, or less I think, is not worth it. Especially once you finish school and you really want to have a good time. So yeah, I basically didn't know what I wanted. I wasn't really a big fan of what was being offered in school, and I'd been to the college open day things, but it really put me off, to be honest. The things they were showing me looked incredibly boring, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So, having my adventure walks was one of my favourite things. I guess now it probably was out of pure boredom, but at the time it was the opposite. I eventually did become bored of being out in the woods on my own because after a while you kind of need more company, but it's what I did at the time. For me it was probably a good thing going in more winter months because I could kind of get away from everyone, and at times that was just what I wanted, just to be away and with myself for a while. So I say, bye mum, I'm going out, and she says, please promise me you won't be too far, but you have to be back in time for dinner. I say, yeah, don't worry, I won't. That was no issue. Whenever my mum made my dinner, it would always be too hot, so I wouldn't always end up eating it all. So I set out. I go across a small stream, and I'm walking along a lake not far from where I live. Now the tree lines are absolutely beautiful here, and you have to be quite careful not to fall in the water. I have my raincoat on because, yes, you guessed it, it's raining a lot now. And I just take a few seconds just to appreciate how beautiful the rainfall is onto the lake. I always used to think when I was younger these were some kind of animals, and my dad would used to joke that it's some kind of fish trying to get air, and me being stupid would believe him and beg him to go fishing to try and capture some of the fish. I'd even put my hands in trying to capture things, and my dad would just laugh. Yeah, sometimes he could be quite funny like that. So, for this particular adventure, I don't really have a direction. I just kind of wanted to get away from everything and the responsibilities of life, you know. I say that, it's not really like I had many back then, but God did it feel like it for me. So, I continue walking while carefully avoiding different puddles and things. The leaves were kind of like a dark orange or red colour, I guess, and most of the trees themselves were barren of life. It kind of set a tone. It wasn't too far away from Halloween, and I actually kind of felt like it was a bit of a themed walk, so I guess it was good. So, just to the left of me is this beautiful lake, and to the right is a more dense forest. I eventually say goodbye to the lake as I continue on my walk. I'm basically following one of the streams uphill a bit, which is a direction I don't usually head in. Now the only annoying thing about doing this is that I got really wet really quick because of the water. Now, as I continue up, I'm careful not to slip and fall on any of the mossy rocks. I eventually make it back up onto a big path, which I know sometimes people like to jog down, but not very often. It's quite a muddy track now, and I have to duck under the trees, which annoys me because I already have quite bad posture, even back then. The low-hanging branches keep slapping me in the face too, which is really annoying, but I continue. I decide to take a turn off of the normal path and go into the woods themselves a bit. I mean actually off the path. I eventually come up to a small bridge that I need to cross over, and this should lead me slightly further away from people. Just to the left of me is a continuation of the stream and the right, and I take a few seconds just to take in how beautiful everything is here. I continue, and I start to press quite deep into the woods. Now it's not dark, but I guess because of the clouds stopping any light piercing through, it's starting to look quite dark. But I know I've still got quite a good few hours of daylight, which is important because then I can be back in time before my mum gets me. Strangely, I notice a very bright orange tree up ahead of me. This is far brighter than any of the other ones I found around me, which I think is quite odd. Then I notice there's a few more like this, but I don't think much of it. I take a while to appreciate, and I think to myself, God, I'm so lucky to be out here and away from everyone. I guess my mind kind of gets lost into the overthinking patterns, where I'm trying to think of what to do, what not to do, and what to chase. I know that I'm definitely on a different path from most people, but I don't know, I kind of just feel a bit like, I'm not sure what I want to do with school. I know I don't really want to study, but there's not much for me to do. I don't find much of anything interesting, really. I had a couple of friends at the time, but they really weren't the greatest, and they weren't necessarily people you could ask for advice. If you wanted advice about one thing, you get told something else, which would probably make your situation worse. Or sometimes when I would speak to my best friend, he would just ramble on and on about himself, and he wouldn't have paid any attention to what you said. He would literally wait for you to finish your sentence before immediately talking about himself, and it just kind of made me feel a bit trapped in my head. I didn't really want to talk to my parents about it. I kind of felt better talking to my friends, but like I said, I wouldn't really get much back in return. So yeah, here I am now, kind of getting lost in my own mind a bit, going deeper and deeper, ever so little, into the woods without realizing it. Now, a good indicator of being far away from normal is the fact that I haven't seen anyone. The rain will usually do this, but not to this degree. This was actually quite rare, to be honest. Again, I think this is odd, but here I am. So at this point, the rain started to slow down a little bit, which is quite nice, but I keep on getting hit in the face by random bits of water that are falling from the trees. Now, weirdly, I come across an abandoned road that I've actually never seen before. It's weird because you can tell this has been abandoned for a long time, but there's definitely no cars that have been on it recently, but why have I never noticed it? I think this is odd. It's kind of like more of a dirt road, but it's weird, it just looks really out of place. Now at this point, I'm walking through some trees that have more life to them, and I guess they look really pretty compared to everything. And once again, I begin getting lost in my mind. Now, when I'm walking, I realise every so often that there's a strange flash of light just coming from the right side of my eyes. Now, I'm actually quite paranoid that maybe I've got some kind of mega migraine coming on or something's wrong with my eyes. It seems like it's during every second step that I notice this weird flash of light. I try my best to ignore it and continue walking, but I can't seem to. It's really bizarre, it literally is like if I step down hard enough it does something, I don't know, maybe nerve related, and causes my eyes to go weird. It's strange because when I decide to remain completely still, I can't really see much of anything. Everything is completely normal, and there's no flashes, so I continue with my walk. But every so often, I'm struck with that flashing light again, and it's actually starting to annoy me a bit. I think, oh god, what now? I've already had quite a bad issue with my vision before, and I don't really have the best eyes, so I truly don't want things to get any worse for me. But every so often, I'm convinced I'm seeing a strange flashing light coming out the right side of my vision, and it will not stop. It's bizarre too, because even if I try and stop and replicate the steps I was doing, there's no flashes now. But hey, this is a problem to worry about if it persists, I tell myself. Though in the back of my mind, truthfully, I'm a little worried. Now, eventually I make it up to a really nice spot not far from a beautiful body of water, and I take a few seconds just to sit here. I've realised now that I'm truly not sure where I've gotten to, but up ahead of me I see a small, kind of man-made bridge thing. There's no water running under the bridge, but you can see that these stones have been arranged specifically for you to go somewhere. This is really odd because there's no trail path up here, and I haven't seen anyone at all, so nobody else is up this way, and just ahead of it you can see a path. This is strange because again, it kind of looks like a path someone's made, but it looks like no one ever goes up here. Now, just off to the left of me, I can see a strange figure just off in the distance, somewhat behind a tree. It's really bizarre, but they seem to sink slowly down into water, and I can't tell what it is. I think this is probably just a tree or something, so I just continue onwards. I'm walking now, splashing into the water. I don't care because my shoes are very waterproof, but as I'm doing so, every so often that flash comes back again. This time it's dead ahead of me. Now this is really odd now. There shouldn't be any flashes in front of me, and the problem I had earlier is out of the right corner of my eye, in my peripheral vision, not directly in front of me. But every time I stop and strain, I can't see anything or anyone. Bizarre. Convinced that there's something wrong with my eyes, I decide that I'm just gonna see what's up here, then I'm gonna head back home. Now while walking, I can see the abandoned remains of a campsite from long ago. It's a tent which has all holes in it, and it kind of looks like an old military issue one, but somewhat older. It's quite bizarre being there. It looks very out of place, and there's not really any signs of any life around here. I'm definitely going up to something that somebody used to live in, but I don't know who or why. So, I just keep going. Now, while I'm walking, I slip slightly and have to grip a tree quickly just to steady myself. As I do so, I look up and there seems to be quite a large, abandoned house up ahead of me. I can't really see it well, but it's basically in a different direction that I'm heading. I decide to go and investigate because why not? I then take my first few steps in that direction, and I hear a click sound now. It's not really like anything you'd be worried about, but it's quite a weird sound. It sounds like plastic being pressed down upon, but again, I don't give it much thought. I'm kind of just blinded to my problems ahead of me with my vision, thinking, oh god, am I going to lose some of my sight or what is this? And I start to panic a bit. Sometimes I can overthink about the smallest details, and that's basically what's happening, but I'm trying to put on a really brave face now. I continue walking, and there it is. It's not as big as I thought it was, but it's kind of like a big old cabin house thing. I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't look like anyone's been there recently, but there is a small muddy path that leads up to it, and I've come this far, so who am I not to continue on my adventure? So, I continue walking, this time sloshing in the leaves next to the path. I don't want to get my shoes too muddy even though they're waterproof because they're brand new pretty much, so I continue onwards. Now every so often I can see some kind of marking in the trees. It's almost like wooden carvings that almost look like they're there naturally, but you can tell they aren't. There's lots of lines and crosses on them, and this is weird. It's something I've not seen before. You can also see a rock formation that seems to channel some water stream down that's definitely man-made. I start to think maybe I've come up to some old logger's cabin and this is what they were looking for. Water. I don't know, it seems pretty bizarre. As I get closer and closer to the structure ahead of me, I have a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there's someone in there. I don't think it's entirely likely, however, and I continue going up to it, so I edge ever closer to this thing, not really thinking much of my surroundings. I eventually make it just outside of this cabin thing, and I just stand there for a moment, confused about what I'm seeing, and then my dad's voice kicks in my head. "Son, what are you doing there? What have I told you before?" I think, God, is this my dad really speaking to me or just my conscious? I look around and realise it's just in my mind, and my dad's advice has really struck to me now. I know I probably shouldn't explore this, but I've come this far now and I don't even know how to get back. Plus, if I ever wanted to go back to this place, it would probably be really difficult to find, so I decide that it's best for me to go on. I make my first few steps towards the porch area, and I try and look through the windows, but it's quite hard to see into this place. It's really quite a nice building, but it's gotta be probably 70 years old or so. It looks quite dated, and I just hope that the door opens. I give a quick hello, quite loudly, and I actually knocked on the door, half expecting somebody to open it, but nobody does. I think this is good because it's a sign I should be able to go in here without having too many issues. So I go ahead and try the door. Surprisingly, it does actually open just a bit. I have to force my way in somewhat, and I take my first step in. I go to call out again, but I stop myself thinking, if someone's in here, they've definitely heard me, but nobody's replied. I'm then met with a really weird smell, one that I've not really smelt before, and it's absolutely disgusting. It smells like somebody's put tons of waste into one area and burnt it, then repeated the same process 20 times. It was awful. It actually makes me put my shirt over my nose just so I don't have to smell it. Honestly, it was so bad. Now, this place looks like it's been abandoned long ago, but strangely there's some signs of life. There's a kettle and other cooking utensils that don't look so dirty like the rest of this place, and there is a mattress and a bed in another room, but I don't bother going through there. Now, the smell seems to get worse as I head into the hallway. I then realise that there's steps going down, and there's lights on strangely at the bottom, just enough to illuminate the bottom of the stairs. Again, the sense of adventure takes over, and my dad's voice is screaming in my head to get out of there, but I don't do that. I just continue on. Now, I take my first few steps, and I have to be careful because my shoes are wet, so it makes me start to slip a little bit, and I steady myself. I now realise what I'm looking at. There's a little tunnel system just ahead of me. Now, it's a very tight squeeze, but there's light coming from it, and I go for it. Now, the floor's pretty dirty but very dry, and the gap's not very big. I can just about fit through it, and I'm not really that big. I'm still slender to this day, but I kind of worm my way through. I'm actually becoming quite claustrophobic, but manage to calm myself down, and I eventually squeeze through the gap. I steady myself up and I look around, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to think of it now. There's a really large basement area that it opens up into, and it's not what you'd expect to find. No storage or boxes, no spare bedroom, no boiler system, no nothing. There's a very dated laboratory with all kinds of different specimens and things in dusty old jars that I can't really see well into. There's all kinds of chemical and things in vials everywhere. And strangely, there's no bad smell here, just the smell of chemicals. Now it must have been powerful because I can smell everything through the sleeve of my shirt that's covering my nose. Now, this is really bizarre. It literally looks like some kind of mad scientist laboratory underground, but why would it be hidden like this? I don't know. Now, I quickly go to switch sides of what's covering my face from my right sleeve to my left because I want to open another door I can see, and as I do so, I'm suddenly struck with that smell once again. That disgusting smell which is more powerful than the chemical smell that I'm feeling right now burning through my nose. It's coming from the door ahead of me. I take one step closer to the door and I look behind myself. There's definitely nobody else here, right? I take a step closer and I put my hand on the door and crash. There's a loud sound from above me. I have to hit my arm to stop me screaming. I immediately withdraw from the door and stop dead in my tracks. I can hear something or someone walking around up ahead of me. Oh god, you're really in trouble now. There's no way that I'm gonna go through that door that I put my hand on before, but I'm certainly trapped now. I stop absolutely dead still for God knows how long, and I don't hear any other sounds. It now dawns on me that I probably shouldn't stay in this room for too long because of the chemical smell, and that I also need to try and get out without making any sound. I've become as quiet as I possibly can, and I slowly take one step forward. I slowly begin to crawl and make my way through that gap. I continue until I'm almost at the end of it and I hear a door close above. Oh good, someone must be leaving, I think to myself. I then push myself clear and start slowly making my way towards the steps. Being as quiet as possible, I take my first step on and it makes a slight creak sound. I stop immediately, so angry that there's no way I can get up here quietly. I realise I'm gonna have to wait it out now, and hopefully this person is gone, whoever they are, or however many there are. I wait for probably an hour, but realistically 15 minutes because of the adrenaline, and I start to make another step up those stairs. I must have only got about halfway up when there's another loud creak. I realise now I don't really have the option to move back. I turn around and I'm sure I can hear the door creak from in the other room that I didn't open. Half expecting some kind of zombie to come out and come and get me, I start to power forward and get ahead, just making it to the top of the stairs. I take a look around and there's no one, luckily. I'm frozen in place but absolutely aware of the sounds coming from behind me. I then slowly make my way to the front door and carefully close it behind me, and that's when I hear it. A kind of scream sound that I've not heard before. I can't figure out the direction that it's coming from, but I then realise that there's something just up on a tree line. It's a very dark figure. I realise that it's a person with extremely disgusting clothes who looks impossibly tall. He was probably about 6 feet 4 or 5, but to me at that age was an absolute giant. I say, hey, and again there's that scream sound. I realise this is someone I can't reason with, and that's when he starts running. Without making another sound, I can see his lanky silhouette beckoning towards me with something in his hand. I'm frozen in fear until eventually something kicks in and I bolt into life. I have no idea what direction I'm going in, but I know I have to get away from this person. Suddenly, it becomes clear that I need to get out of here and I start sprinting into the woods. Now the problem is, I'm no longer on a path. I don't know what direction that I'm heading in, and I'm being hunted. I glance over my shoulder quickly, and I start crying a little bit. I can't see this person just yet, but I can see the cabin. I start sprinting and slowly making my way across different puddles and things, trying my best not to be heard and not to be seen. I can see more of the strange markings on the trees, and as I'm on my journey, I can see something just off to the left. It looks like another campsite, but this one's covered in bags, and that smell hits me again. Even at my most fear, I still realize how disgusting this thing smells. I eventually realize that I've come to an area where the trees are going to be really difficult to pass, and this area is very steep and probably really going to slow me down. I'm frozen for a second, and I look to my left and see a lake. There's a dated sign that says danger, deep water. I realize I can't go this way. I look back and I can hear him screaming again, not far away now. I can't see where he is, but he definitely knows where I am. I realize that my only option is to try and go up this steep hill, and I basically have to kind of swing from tree to tree to make it up here, half slipping the whole time. I scream, "Who are you and what do you want?" And there's silence now. Annoyingly, the sounds of the rain are basically covering up whoever this is chasing me, or however many there are. I've only seen one so far, but I have a feeling there might be more people. I make it up to kind of a flat area, and I have to catch my breath for a few seconds. Just as I'm doing so, there's that flashing again. I've realised now that it's probably the flash of a camera, and something is definitely going on here. I don't know if this is the same person chasing me as before, but my god, is it weird. Now I know that somebody was taking pictures of me earlier, or at least that's what I think it is, or maybe it's my eyes going bad, but I don't know. I luckily make it to a more downhill area now that I know I can pick up the pace on, and being slender comes as an advantage in this situation because I can basically dart in between the different trees. I start saying aloud, "I'm sorry Dad, I'm sorry Grandpa, I should have listened to you both. I don't know what I'm doing out here on my own. I'm not a big strong ranger like you. I'm sorry." Really thinking these are going to be my last words. Crazy thoughts to have at such a young age. I wasn't necessarily annoyed at myself for going on the adventure, just more annoyed for being dishonest to my parents. I thought if I didn't make it, I would have hated the fact that I'd lied to them. Now I can no longer hear the screaming coming from behind me or see the flashes, so I start to walk a bit slower, desperate to get my breath back and suffering from quite a large adrenaline dump, feeling kind of weird. I keep walking and I've realised that if I continue going downhill, I should eventually make it to a larger bridge which should be closer to civilization. I start following the edge of the lake, every so often looking behind me. I'm now at kind of like a light jogger's pace as I start to pick up speed again. I've probably been on the run for a good 20 or 25 minutes, which is an insanely long time to be running and sprinting through a forest going up and down hill. My legs actually feel like they're jelly, and I'm really scared that they're going to completely give way at some point and that I'm never going to make it back home. But luckily, just off in the distance is that bridge, and honestly it looks like the gates of heaven to me at this point. It honestly felt like I was taken to another world when I saw this and snapped back out of this crazy dream one. I then go as quick as I possibly can for another good 5 or 10 minutes, eventually making it over to that bridge. I'm too scared to look behind me once more, I've realised that my only option to really get out of here now is to wait for a car, and I stick my thumb up like I've seen in the films, and eventually a car stops for me. I quickly jump in, and they ask what's wrong. I say, nothing, I'm just a bit far from home, and I say where you need to take me. And then the driver just looks at me and says, well, you're a long way from home, but don't worry, I'm heading over that way. I'll happily give you a ride there. And I kind of zoned out and didn't say anything for the next hour or so. I then ask how much further is it, and the driver says about another 50 minutes, and it hits me just how far away I've gone from the area that I knew. I must have been out for hours, but I guess your time kind of gets distorted when you're in a traumatic situation. Eventually, they drop me just off where I can quickly depart and jog the rest of the way home. I say thank you, and I do that. I never even caught the name of this driver, but I really wish I did because I'd love to thank them now. They probably ended up saving my life by dropping me off. I just wish I could have told them what happened, but I just couldn't. I was too scared. I eventually got home and surprisingly had only missed dinner by about 10 minutes, so my mum wasn't too angry. Now my mum would have done me for absolute murder had she have known what had happened, and God knows what my dad would have done, so this story remained a secret up until now when I decided to share it. Now, I don't know exactly where the area is. It would be impossible for me to find now, as I'd moved town and so did my parents. But my God, I don't know what I discovered that day, but I can only imagine it was either some kind of drug den, or maybe somebody was doing God knows what out in those woods. I just hope to God that nobody else ever had to discover it like me, but I hate how stupid I was for going to investigate. During my summers, I'd spend a lot of my time working as a fire ranger. Now, this is a job which worked different to how it does in America. I would have to do this during the summer, but I'd also have to commit to doing some other jobs too. Basically in the winter, when it could be quite cold in some regions of my country, you'd have to go miles away from home and basically just patrol. Now, we actually had a nickname for this job. You were basically the lost soldiers, patrolling land for seemingly no reason whatsoever, and like lost soldiers, you were very liable to get picked off. Now, when we said picked off, we would jokingly mean snipers, but basically we'd mean while wandering out there alone, you could easily die of the cold or something. It was such a stupid job. I mean, actually, they ended up outlawing this because of how dangerous it was. It just seems so stupid to me and like such a big waste of human life to have to go out there for no reason. This actually went on for years and years before they made us stop, but I guess at least I experienced it, and maybe I actually learned something from it. Now, what exactly I learned, I don't think I can tell you. To be honest, I would often just get lost in my thoughts while out there. I mean, when you've got nobody else to talk to, you can't always get a radio signal. What are you supposed to do? I can't answer that. Now, there was one strange occurrence which would happen. Every so often while wandering, we would encounter what we called the drunken man. This is somebody who would seemingly stumble around there in the middle of nowhere, go missing without a trace. It was actually quite scary sometimes. We said drunken because that's the way that this person seemed to walk, but they might have been injured or something. But this sighting went on for years and years, so we didn't think it was a real person. I remembered encountering him one day, and I was desperate to figure out who this is. I remembered really struggling to keep up. His clothes were tattered and worn, kind of looking like that of somebody who didn't have a home. But something felt off about this. I kept going for what felt like miles and miles, but I never seemed to be able to actually capture this person. I remembered one really weird encounter was when I was trying to catch up with this guy, and suddenly there seemed to be others moving very quickly through the forest. It was really scary. It was almost like loads of people would just randomly run through different parts of the forest. It was kind of like they didn't have a direction either, almost like atoms being scattered in something. It felt really weird. There seemed to be order but also chaos at the same time. So I knew this was definitely a weird moment. But it seemed like whenever I tried to approach these people, I just couldn't get close enough. It was really weird, but in the end I just kind of grown used to it. I accepted that we'd have weird encounters with the drunken people, and that's all we'd think of it really. So yeah, that was definitely a strange part of this job. Now, I absolutely adored the summer part. It was so nice being up in those areas. You had so much peace of mind, and you know what else you had? Being up in the tower, you get a really good radio reception. I would actually bring my own radio just to talk to other people who are into that, and it was really nice. You really had a community feel, and it's kind of weird to say, but you felt like others were there with you. But in the snow, you had none of that. However, I did have something that made everything so much more interesting that I still can't explain today, even more weird than the drunken walkers. Let me explain. There was a rumour going around that there was some kind of strange facility or something out there that shouldn't have been. Apparently, there was either some kind of illegal operation where people would log or something similar going on there. Every so often, we'd see some big trucks moving through, but we couldn't seem to figure out exactly who they were or where they were going. Just every so often you'd hear that familiar sound of an engine, and we'd never seemed to be able to get close. We were growing a little bit paranoid, but we didn't think much of it. I remembered speaking to one of my friends on the rarest of occasions where I got to do my patrol with the other guy, and we were mentioning how weird this was. I said, what would you do if you found out who they were? He said, well, nothing. It could be drugs or something. You don't want to get involved with that. I said, yeah, you're right. We were walking down some wooden banister type thing on one of the man-made areas of where we patrolled, but I couldn't help thinking to myself that I wanted to explore what this actually was, and I kind of knew that if I ever found this place, I was going to have to be the first person to figure out what it was. So we started talking about a few other things, and my friend turns and says to me, watch out there, and I say thank you, you too. We now have to part ways because where we are. For some reason though, the conversation seemed to stick with me, and I was more eager than ever now to actually find out what was out there. Again, this is another problem with the role, because if you're out there all day, you might get fixated on one thing, whether it's irrational or not. But here I was, hopefully encountering my old friend, the drunken walker, but I didn't find anything. A number of weeks passed and everything falls into monotony. Nothing new's happening, not much to see, not much to do, when eventually, I'm sitting down taking a break, opening my coffee. Even this coffee has gone cold, I think to myself. I just can't think of how this can get much worse. And as I'm sitting there, annoyed about this, drinking my lukewarm salvation drink, I hear something. It's the slow grumble of an engine. I think, that's it. This has happened for a reason. This is my destiny to figure out what this is, as I slowly get up. Now, it took me a while. I don't really have the best hearing, so I really couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from. I did hear the sound of the engine getting louder and louder, so I was certain now that I was going to find where they had gone to. So I turned around, and realise that it's coming from over the hill. The problem is it's not going to be easy to access this area. It means that I'm going to have to do a little bit of hiking and go through some pretty rough terrain. I'm actually quite defeated now and think that I've lost it. But I still continue that way regardless. I've at least figured out the road that they go on now. So I'm walking with snow covering everywhere, thinking that I just wish I had a warm coffee here. I'd also bought some expensive gloves recently which broke immediately and I was pretty annoyed about it. Again though, it's what I said, when you spend too much time out here with nothing else going on, you fixate on stupid things and you don't really think rationally any longer about situations and whatnot. So now, I continue on like normal, and I seem to get closer to where I can get a vantage point and figure out what this is. So I get over the hill and I can see a long narrow road. I decide to join it now. I don't think that I'm going to get to where I'm desiring to go, but at least if I head in the direction I should figure out where this is and make a mental note so I can come back. I noticed some moss on the trees and other plants and I thought this is interesting because you don't really see it commonly out here. Everything's usually doused in white, so that was bizarre to see. I continue on and I think I can just about make out sight of where the truck goes around a corner. I can't be certain because how far away I am, but I'm convinced this is something, and I come up to a small man-made bridge. I can also see the tyre tracks in the snow, so I decide that I'm going to follow them. Now I should mention that at this point I'm starting to go quite far beyond my boundary of where I'm supposed to go. But to be honest, I just stopped caring. It's like, you know when you work in a job where you've had so much rubbish to deal with that you no longer care if you get fired that day. It was sort of like that. I mean, yeah, I needed the money, but I didn't care so much. I knew I'd be okay regardless. So I continue walking when I hear it. The slow rumble of another engine, and it wasn't too far away. I think it's coming from up ahead, and I'm convinced that the truck is returning to where I am, so I stop dead for a moment. I stare and stare, but strangely, it doesn't seem to be getting any larger, and I don't seem to be getting any closer to anything. I basically can't see much of anything. There's some kind of movement ahead of me, but I can't make out what it is. But the sound is getting closer. Then, in an idiotic moment, I turn around and realise the truck's coming from behind. That means I've got to hide then. I think, God, this isn't great, they're going to see my footsteps. The problem is too, because where I'm standing, I'm basically flanked by trees that I can't really go through. They're kind of too thick and dense. I mean, I can, but it's going to be obvious where I've went. So I instead start picking up the pace. I strangely feel a little bit of fear now, as I start to move further and further away, knowing that this thing is getting closer to me and I'm going way beyond where I normally do. I decided to start running inside the tracks themselves to make it less obvious that somebody was here. I eventually get up to another area where I think I can jump into the trees and not be seen, or at least with my footsteps. I decided to palm a lot of snow off of a tree and start covering the 2 footsteps leading out from the road into the branches. I look back, but I still don't see anything and I'm not too worried. The good thing is I have a white coat, so it's probably a bit harder to see me than not, but I don't really want to chance it. I go a bit further ahead, and luckily there's a stream, so I know that it's going to perfectly cover me. As I go to hide under the bridge thing, I almost fall in, and that's the most scary part for me. I know if I go in the water, nobody's going to find me or rescue me. We've actually had a couple of people die from this before. In fact, they've actually went across bridges that were supposed to be safe that has ended up collapsing on them, and well, you know the rest. So yeah, I certainly didn't want to join their ranks or be another memory of this place, so I just wait. Now the truck seems to be getting closer, but I still can't see it. I've covered up myself so that just my eyes are showing, and I hope that I'm able to actually spot them first. It gets very close and then suddenly stops, and I hold my breath. god, they found me. This is it, I think, as I hear two people get out. Now, I can't hear what's actually happening too well. I just know that I have to stay still. The problem is, because of the lack of movement, it's actually making me really cold now. And for some reason, being near the water made me so much more cold, and I start shaking. My teeth are actually chattering together, and I bite down to try and stop this making too much sound. But then, I hear them get back in, a door close, and the engine start up, and they continue on their way. I let out a sigh of relief as I exhale, and I can feel the moisture of my breath onto the coat. I then come further out of where I'm hiding, and I can see it slowly going off. The truck. Yes, that's it. I've done it. I've made it. I'm suddenly filled with exuberance as I slowly make my way out of the cold and back onto the path. Now, I didn't actually check if anybody else was around. I was just convinced that they had gone off. Well, I see them round the corner, and I'm pretty convinced that I know exactly where I need to go now. I think, yes, finally, I've got them. I honestly can't wait to actually explore what this place is or where they're going. I mean, literally nobody seems to figure out exactly what this is, and I'm excited to potentially be the first. So I get up and keep making my way forward, very excitedly. I just keep telling myself that this is going to be it. You're going to solve this mystery. And I keep making my way further. It was actually getting a little bit dark now. Now, I knew I had a while before it was completely dark, but I didn't want to be out here in the cold, as I then start to see some kind of barbed wiry fence as I go off the road onto another path which runs parallel to it. I think, yes, this is it. What is this place? As I see the facility is larger than I expected it to be. Now, it seems like there's a large perimeter, and I'm not sure if the fence is actually electrified or not. I spent quite a while trying to figure out if I can actually go in there or not, and I think, how am I going to navigate this? I didn't know how well they could work in the cold. I spent probably about 15 minutes of this before eventually I think, oh yeah, I can literally just go around, and kind of laugh at myself as I realise there's a big gap in the fence. I think, so much for security. Now, the sense of danger has completely eroded to the sense of adventure, and I keep going further. I can't see any other steps in the snow, so I'm pretty convinced that I'm the only person here. So that means that I can get my adventure underway, and I'm very excited for this. So I go further and further, and eventually come up into a clearing near a small waterfall. I stop by the waterfall, and I think, well, where is it? There literally doesn't seem to be anything, which is especially odd. I also can't see the trucks anymore, so I think maybe they've just stopped, and maybe it was nothing, and I actually feel a bit disappointed now. Well, after not too long, I have a look round, and I see nothing. I think, God, is this all I've done? I've just wasted all my time, and I'm gonna get home late because I'm stupid. I start talking to myself when I hear a truck again, and I duck down. I look up, and I can see a truck pulling up to a tiny cabin. Then, not much else. It's more like a wooden hut than anything. This thing was tiny. I decided that I had to figure out what this was. Why were they all stopping at this one thing? That's weird. As I then realised that the truck's starting to turn round again. It hasn't stopped so much, it's been stopped and it's now on the move. So I'm still hiding and trying to figure out what else I can do now. Now, I was almost face down in the snow and getting very cold, and I decided to very slowly make my way behind a tree. The chances of being spotted up here is pretty low, to be honest, so I'm not too bothered. I eventually make my way up there, and I camp out for a little while. I watch as this truck slowly comes past on that same road again. It's a large truck which is unmarked. I think that's interesting. After probably about 10 more minutes, that thing eventually goes off, and I think, well, yeah, it's time for me to go further up now. I took a look around and I can't see anything, just snow covering everywhere. I decide that I can follow the tree line and probably not be seen as I go up there. The thing was, it was quiet. There was no reason for me to believe logically that anybody else was up here, and the chances are it was simply myself here. So yeah, I'm pretty happy when I realize this. It makes everything so much more exciting for me. So now, I start to go further along, and eventually, I make it closer towards that hut thing. Again, I can't see anything, but I do see more tracks in the snow, so that definitely meant that there were others around here. So it's definitely an interesting one. I just want to know what this is. So I slowly, bravely make my way over there. Again, I don't hear anyone, so I don't presume that there's any reason for me not to investigate this, which is probably a mistake. But I get up and I really can't see anything around. I'm just perplexed as to why this is here, why the truck stopped here. I think, well, if there's something dodgy, I'll be able to see it and quickly go anyway. Who knows, maybe it's filled with frozen bodies or something. I had a strange feeling though when I was here. I look round and there's no windows on this thing either. There's definitely something being hidden in here, and I just want to find out exactly what it is. So I go through. I then eventually make my way towards where I can see a door which is unlocked, which I think is really funny. I do have a flashlight on me, but it's only a really small one, which is basically the size of a pen. But that doesn't matter though. So I open it, and I see an elevator. Now, the elevator shaft doesn't seem to match the environment. It looks kind of too clean, kind of too perfect, and I realise this is interesting. My hands are now shaking as I raise my hand up towards where the button is to get the elevator to work. My hand's still shaking now, and I'd say I just can't do this. I so badly want to know what this is, but I don't know what's waiting for me on the other side. As I do so, I hear some kind of echo or something, and it sounds like it comes from very far down. I think, this is so weird. Then, eventually it lights up. I jump back, and I quickly go out, now running, trying to get back. Something is coming up there and I don't know what it is. The thing is, it appeared so quickly. I only have time to hide on the opposite end of this, and I wait. I'm waiting, expecting to hear somebody come in, but I don't hear anything. Now, I thought this was weird, and I slowly peer around one edge, very slowly, and I see nothing. I look over my shoulder, still nothing. I realise the coast is clear, so I open the door again, and I can now see the shaft open. I then decide, stupidly, to step in. Now, I don't know why I'd done this, but I just wanted to see what it would feel like. And then the shaft closes, and I start to panic. I watch the daylight slowly fade through the door, and I start panicking, thinking, oh no, you're so stupid. Why on earth did you come here? What did you expect? And I get really angry with myself. Then, the shaft starts to move down slowly. Weirdly, there's no buttons to press on the inside. I have never felt so much fear in my life. It almost felt like I was heavy, and like I just couldn't move. I then realise how warm this place is, as I start to go further and further underground. It was a long time. It probably took almost a full minute to get there, and I actually faced away from the door, and then I feel myself coming to a stop, and I slowly turn around. There's no pinging sound to let you know that you're at your destination. I was frozen to the spot as I see what's a very, very long corridor. I mean, it was so far that I could barely see the end of it, going further and further underground, with white-coloured concrete walls. I can't hear anything at the other end of it. I just wait, unsure if I should proceed or not. I go to take one foot out of the door when I feel absolutely frozen, I have a feeling that if I proceed here, I'm not going to make it back. Then, I hear a very, very weird sound. It's like a metallic scratching sound which is very loud, followed by some kind of screaming. I don't know what it is. I suddenly recoil back into the shaft. I take a deep breath out, and then I jump back as I hear a sound right next to me. The doors are closing. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or not because I don't know if I'm going further underground or not at this point. I seriously have no idea what was happening. So I just waited, completely frozen again with fear. Now eventually, I feel the pull of gravity and I start to go up again. I kind of collapsed into the corner a bit at this point as I felt just so much relief as to not be trapped there. Honestly, it was really unreal. I don't believe in God or anything, but I honestly felt like some kind of holiness entered my body then and took me out of the danger. Going up felt internally long for some reason. I then realised that I'm probably going to another floor. The elevator then stops for a second, but continues on its way as I'm now violently shaking. It's not because of the cold, I'm actually very warm. It's because of the fear, just pure fear and somewhat agony. Eventually, I get closer and closer to the top and I hear the doors open and see some light. The door's still open from when I last come there. I slowly turn around just to look at the thing to make sure it was real, as I go out the door, closing it behind myself. I took a while as I very slowly walked away, almost like I'd just come back from war or something, a little bit confused by all of it. I don't quite know what to make of it, when I hear the vibration sound of a truck's engine again. I let out a very small and faint gasp as I start sprinting to the tree line. The problem is, this time it was much closer than I'd expected. I'm busted. They've definitely seen me. I eventually get up to the tree line and I decide that all I can do now is keep moving. I'm moving for quite a while, expecting to hear the truck stop, but it doesn't at first. I think, God, guards are coming for me, guards, as I keep running along here. The thing is, I don't really know my way, and I obviously shouldn't have been here. That's obviously by far the most apparent thing here, but I was too stupid. Why did I come here? What on earth was the benefit of this? I start cursing myself over and over again. I continue on, and eventually I get up to where the small bridge is again and make my way over. I'm now stuck with a harrowing moment where I have to go back onto the path where the trucks are coming, but I don't have a choice. I start doing so and I hear the engine again. It made me turn into some kind of super sprinter as I keep going. The thing was, I got messy now because of the fear. I wasn't following a nice neat path. It was going to be really obvious that somebody had been walking up here, but I didn't care. It seems like I can keep pace with this truck, finally. It's not gaining on me, but it means it's not getting further away. But I realise I can't keep up this pace for too long. I eventually dash out of the road into the woods as I get back onto a more normal trail. Within 10 minutes, I can no longer hear the truck and I'm back onto the normal paths. The only footsteps I can see are my own, and I continue following them. I think it was comforting knowing that I'm at least following parts of myself, and I kept going fixated on this. I actually only stared at the ground at this point. I did so for about 25 minutes, and I eventually get back to the normal areas that I know in. I didn't stop going though. My knees actually start to feel like they're jelly. It's exhausting running in the snow, but that's what I'd done for quite a long time now. I eventually make it back, and I didn't finish my job. It was just about daylight, and I eventually get back into my car. I sat there shaking for probably another 30 or 40 minutes as I realised that I've discovered something I wasn't supposed to. Now, I knew that I had done something wrong, but I was just scared of what consequences might come later on. So I sat here for a little while before deciding that I've got to get home, and I decided to tell nobody about what I'd seen. In fact, I've only recently, all these years later, decided to be a bit more honest about it, but I know I shouldn't have been there, but stupidly I was. Now, the following story took place in Western Germany. It all started with a horrible sound of screaming outside my house at night, which I already compared to all the animal wildlife sounds from zoology institutes, but nothing comes close to it. It sounded like a woman screaming in agony, but then again even worse. It felt like I could feel the vibrations in my vein. It's hard to describe, but it was really scary. I live in a tiny house next to the forest and mountains. It was dark in October, and I laid in my bed, which is in a sleeping corner. Right next to it is a window, which is always half opened, and above it is just a flat roof, garden all around the home. At first I heard one animal/creature scream. Now there seemed to be two of them. They sounded to be very close and wouldn't stop screaming for a couple of minutes. The next thing I heard was something heavy running through the garden under my bedroom window, followed by heavy branches breaking at the height of my level on the second floor. I also heard a loud rush of air/wind combined to that. In the next second, this animal/creature jumped on my roof so that in a moment it was right above me. And that was the moment when things start to get messy and confusing for me. First thing I want to point out, that this animal/creature sounded so heavy when it landed. I don't know any animal species that are that big around here. It sounded massive and therefore surreal. Also, the quickness of its movement seems unreal to me. After that, it jumped on my roof from one side to the other. It first sounded like it was something extremely heavy on two legs, but that suddenly changes to what sounds like something extremely heavy on four paws. I remembered sitting straight up in my bed under it almost with an intense pulse and my mind just trying to process what I'm hearing. What kind of creature is it? Now, that was almost a turning point when I seriously felt threatened. Since I'm a girl living alone in a tiny home, I didn't really have any protection to fight off something like this, so I just decided to do something stupid. I thought, maybe I can shock it or scare it away, so I hit my bed against my hand as hard as I could, as loud as I could. Now, not even 1 second passed after I hit the glass. Then this creature goes from back towards outside. It must have basically been sitting right above me in that moment, basically reached down my window, and it reacted so quickly it was surreal. The sound of what touched my window glass felt like a mixture of claws and feathers. This reaction and the way it sounded kind of put me in shock, I guess. I realized I'm quite in a bad situation now, because whatever it was clearly very intelligent, huge, and wouldn't back down. That's how it felt to me, at least. As if I didn't have any power in that situation. Basically, I just froze on my bed, and my back was against the wall, and all I can do is basically just wait now. Now, I was too scared to close my window. I was too scared to breathe, but suddenly it just jumped off my roof. It sounded like a massive weight had fell. Now, I've never encountered anything like this before. I felt so alone with it, until last night, when I went on the internet and found something similar. Somebody within the last 24 days had actually encountered something almost exactly the same. Now, I know that I wasn't the only one who encountered this, but it leaves me with the question, what was it? A few years ago in my previous home, I saw a strange apparition in the hallway by my son's room. It looked like a hazy, distorted figure of a human. I didn't think too much of it and thought that my mind was just making me believe something was there that truly wasn't. It occurred a few times, but then one day, I heard my son screaming and crying. I couldn't tell if his cry was that of something that he'd seen or if it was less serious. I ran in there nonetheless, and he was crying, saying that he saw a big scary man in the room who was scaring him. It was one of the weirdest moments in my life. I knew nobody else was in the home, but I could tell my son was truly terrified by whatever he had seen. My wife was with me when this happened, and afterwards, she told me that she had seen the same thing, but also thought nothing of it. We had a spare bedroom by the kids' room where my grandparents stayed when they were in town. They also spoke of hearing footsteps in the night as well as voices. I never experienced those specifically, but I don't know what it could have been. I'm a park ranger, and I'd like to share my story with you all today. More in the sense that I want to get some opinions on exactly what happened to me. I mean, I have my own view, but I guess in my line of duty I probably think differently about threats and dangers, so I really want the outside perspective. I haven't really spoke to too many of my friends about these things because, well, even where I work, I guess like rumours spread really easily and things. I mean, it wasn't the other day that I told people at my job that I was going to be leaving soon, and obviously I didn't give them permission to tell everybody else, but what happened? When I go back, I get complete random people that I barely even speak to saying, "Oh, you're leaving soon?" Yeah, I don't know, it's something that's always annoyed me. I just really don't like it or appreciate it. I feel like it's a big breach of trust, and with something like this happening to me, I don't want that to be the case, but like I said, I want to hear what people think about my experience in my own words, not from the words of others who have potentially misconstrued of what happened, and the truth is what's important here. So, as I said, I'm a park ranger, but I'm going to be leaving the job soon. Now, it's not in the sense that I don't enjoy it like I used to, I just kind of need to evolve as a person, and I think being out there on my own was good for a while, but not for too long. I'm kind of like a social butterfly in the sense that I really need to be around other people, and as much as I enjoy being out there, it kind of becomes the same picture each day, and regardless of how relaxed I feel, I really feel like I need more. And I'm probably too young to have this kind of job in some regards, but not in others. So, I was stationed somewhere that we have a beautiful lake. Now, this lake is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the most blue ones that you'll ever see. I can't remember exactly why it was so blue, but it was a really beautiful thing. Now, on the day in particular that this event happened, everything was going like normal. I was doing a number of my duties, and, well, in my country, one of those duties is to pick up rubbish that people leave behind and litter and things, however you guys say it. I didn't really have an issue with this, it just annoyed me because sometimes in the sun it would make bags melt a bit, and I guess you can imagine how bad that actually smelled. It wasn't a nice thing. But again, someone had to do it, and often it was us. Now, I started picking up some litter which is on the trowel, and this actually annoyed me. I think, why on earth do people want to trash this place? I mean, literally, that's all they're doing. But I have my little grabber thing, and I'm putting everything inside the bag. So, to be honest, I'm actually enjoying the time more than I expected to at this point. The trees are given a really nice shade now, so there was no need for me to rush trying to get out of the sun. I have a camel pack, so I'm just constantly drinking from this on my journey. Now the bag gets pretty full, but I kind of had like a holster thing I could hook it onto, so it would kind of hang off the side of me if I use that stick, if that makes sense. But it wasn't too heavy, it was manageable really. Now while I'm doing this, I do notice something strange. There seems to be some kind of diving suit. Well, at least that's how it appears to me. It's probably like, I don't know if you've seen one of the Batmans with Penguin, but the old one. You know the cat lady, the thing she wore in that? It was more similar to that, but obviously had been in the water at some point. Now, I stopped for a moment and think to myself, well, we do get some people that go swimming here, but you wouldn't really want to wear this for that job. And I think this is pretty bizarre. Now, I've prod around a little bit, and I'm worried that maybe it's something weird that shouldn't be here. I gather my thoughts for a moment and realise that it's probably best if I just continue on my way. I'm going to have to come back for it another time. This is quite annoying really, because I have to go all the way back and get another one of those smelly bags to take this thing. I did try and lift it up originally with my grabber thing, but it was far too heavy and I don't want that dripping on me while I'm walking. It will not be a fun time. But I'm prepared for this and I continue on my trail. I get to a point where I decide that now's a good time to get some food in me and stop for a little bit. I'm eating some of my sandwiches and I've got some peanuts with me when I notice something drifting off in the lake. It's really bizarre. It kind of looks like some kind of boat, but it's definitely not a canoe. It's slightly bigger than that. But it seems to just vanish suddenly. It's almost like it sunk down into the water, and I get a little suspicious of this. Now, bearing in mind that I'm actually seeing this through some trees and I'm not 100% convinced myself that what I'm seeing is actually real or not. I also had my cool shades on, so that probably made it a lot harder. I take them off though, and I still can't see much of anything. I don't really have the best of eyes to be honest, and annoyingly I left my glasses back at our old station office, whatever you call it. So I stand there observing, and I don't see anything initially. I note this is odd, and I think, well, got some more trash to pick up, and I continue on my way. Now, one thing I'd like to note is that I didn't see anybody else during this time, which is a pretty bizarre thing because, well, usually you see a couple of people around, but today, it was like one of those western ghost towns of today, where nobody's there but people were once. So, I decided that I should probably get heading back now, but not before I take in a beautiful look at this lake. I think this is really nice here, and I actually take off my boots and take my socks off and put my feet in the water. I found it was a nice way to cool down, and that with the sun on your face is really a nice thing. And as I'm doing so, I hear something in the water. Now again, it sounds like somebody's thrown something, or there's a boat that's just come ashore. I look around, half expecting to see somebody dragging things up, but I can't see anyone or anything. I presume that maybe it's a fish, but I don't think the fish here are that big, and that's not how they would normally act. I decide instead that it's high time just to get back. Now the trash is smelling pretty bad at this point, and I kind of swung it round on itself so that way it wouldn't make that much of a smell when I was walking and would kind of seal on itself. And would you know, it splits open. So now I have to spend a while trying to put things on it again and getting it back to normal and kind of making the bag smaller and the smell stronger. As I'm doing this, I notice some more trash up ahead of me, which is strange because I was sure I cleared the path perfectly. I now know that people probably come past here recently, and I go to pick it up. It looks like some kind of note, but I don't bother actually looking at it and just put it straight in the bag. I continue on my walk now, and eventually I get back, throw that nasty stuff away, and actually have a shower there. I know that's kind of like ironic to some people listening because obviously I still have to go back for the wetsuit thing, but I just don't want to smell bad. And I'm quite germophobic, I think that's how you say it, but I don't know, I just don't like germs at all, and I was starting to smell a bit where the bag had opened on myself. But not to worry. I have my nice shower and I get a big thick bag now. I make some notes of what I'm doing in the day because where I work we have to log everything that we're doing. It's just like a general process, but it's important for security reasons. So I say goodbye to the dirty clothes and step out in the new ones with the new bag and everything ready. Now there was some cloud cover so it is a little bit darker, and it also meant I didn't need my sunglasses, and I could in fact wear my normal glasses, which I was happier doing so. Now I'm able to see a lot more clear this time, and it probably would have been a good idea to bring them before, but that's in hindsight. So I start making my way again, and I realise that there's more and more trash. I keep on putting them in the bags again, and I think this is a little odd, and it's also annoyed me because obviously I've probably left the trowel with this stuff and not realised it, so now I'm doubling up on my job. The other issue I have is that there's more important things for me to do later in the day. I actually have to install a sign somewhere later on, and I'm not looking forward to it because that thing's heavy. So I just continue on and eventually make it up to where that wetsuit thing is. Now that's the thing, I say where it is because I can't find it. I can find the silhouette where obviously it was in the water before and left a water print, but there's no wetsuit to be found. I look around everywhere and I really can't seem to find it. I think maybe it's drifted in again, and what do I see? Just floating off on the shoreline. I can see it, probably about a mile away or something, and it's on the other embankment. This is no issue for me though, my friend, because I have to go over there with that sign, so I'm not too bothered. I just think it's odd because it shouldn't have been able to slip down because it was actually on some high ground, but not the kind something could roll off of, so I think this is bizarre, but again, I think maybe I'm having a bad day and I'm going a bit senile, or I don't know. So I just pick up more and more trash, and that's when I notice something odd. It all seems to be paper with things scrawled onto it, and I think, well, someone must have done some weird art project, or it was some young kid that was doing drawings and their parents didn't want to take it home. Okay, but that doesn't explain why it wasn't there earlier. So I quickly retraced my steps and ended up finishing the trash rounds. Ah yes, my favourite part of being a ranger that I missed so much, and what was actually an addition to what I was doing originally, but we'll talk about that another time. Now, I start walking back and I have a strange feeling. It's almost like there was somebody else there with me, but of course there's no one around. It actually isn't uncommon to have this feeling and sense, and I don't know. I'm not going to say that I'm someone that picks up on these things well, but it's just a feeling I'd noticed a few times before in this line of work. You're taught actually to listen to it and not ignore it because it might be a sign of, I don't know, somebody in danger. But I checked the log and there's no such reports, so I know that there's definitely nothing wrong. So I just kind of shake it off and get back. Now I'm a bit more annoyed because I have to bring this heavy signpost, but that's fine. At least I'm actually going to get that thing that I saw earlier. I decide once again not to log it though, because I'm going to have a long day at this point. So I start my trek. I have to walk quite a number of miles to get through to the other side of the lake, and as I'm walking I notice something. There's two people in a canoe, but I can't really make out much about them. They're kind of in the shadow side of a cloud, if you know what I mean, so I can't really see any details in particular. But they're not supposed to be here. I know that much for absolute certain, and I wave at them and call out. What was a little creepy is they both stop and seem to stare at me. And it could be my eyes playing tricks on me, but it almost looks like one of them's wearing a kind of plague doctor outfit. It's not exactly the same as like the European ones that we had, but it's not far off, and I think this is really weird. Again, I haven't got the best of eyes, and stupidly I don't have binoculars with me, so I can't get a closer look. But I decide that I should meet them on the other side because I think maybe they're the ones who have the wetsuit, and I have a few questions for them. So I start walking now. Every so often I can make them out for a little bit, but then they dart in between trees. My line of view is blocked is what I'm saying basically, but I'm a persistent being, so I keep going. Now, it doesn't take too long, and eventually I get to roughly where they should be, but they're nowhere to be found. I don't know if you guys have seen Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's almost like when the boat just sunk into the water of that weird guy with the tentacles, but they've just vanished now. I'm not really sure exactly what to make of this, but I can only presume that yes, they have gone to the other side of the embankment. Now, I'm not too much further away now, but I'm getting a bit irritated now because this is the kind of stuff that makes you have a really long day. And guess what? My boss doesn't care. He'll just let me have overtime when I'm working till like 9 or 10 at night, then want me to come in at 8 AM the next day. Yeah, you can imagine why I had to leave this place, but anyway, I digress now. So, I'm not too much further away now, and I'm very perplexed about as to where they could have specifically gone. It really doesn't make sense to me how they've just gone under. I mean, is there some kind of big iceberg which I'm missing and they've gone into it like the Titanic? Maybe, but the water doesn't feel that cold. Now, I was so curious as to where they went, I was half tempted to go for a swim. I mean, it'd be quicker than walking, but obviously I'm not going to do that. So I just make my way over to the embankment, and there it is. The wetsuit. It seems to have come snagged upon some logs and things that have fallen off from trees, so I go over to it. And that's when I suddenly feel fear come across my entire body, and I'm kind of froze, just fixated on it without thinking. It suddenly hits me, this could actually be a body. It doesn't look like the wetsuit I saw before, and I think maybe this is a person who's drowned. And I get some adrenaline, and I very slowly proceed. Something feels a little off about this situation, and it literally looks like a headless thing there. I get a big stick and I decide to poke it. I know that's 100% not what I'm supposed to do in this line of duty, but I don't know. There's nothing else I can actually think of doing that's probably going to work now. And that's when I realise something rather bizarre. Some kind of stuffing comes out, and it's not a body at all. It's almost like a farmland scarecrow, but it kind of looks weirdly put together, almost like the Catwoman suit. Now, this is where things are really weird, because this was the thing I saw earlier, but it didn't have anything in it. So that raises a question. Who filled this thing up, and why was it here on this bank? I think that's really weird, so what do I do next? Well, I grab another stick, an even bigger one this time, and kind of drag it ashore. And there's some stuffing falling out, which is kind of like originally a white colour, but it's gone to more of a dark cream, I guess. And I'm able to take it ashore, and I leave it there. I'm staring at this thing, which is almost like the farmland thing I said about, but not quite, and I don't know what to make of it. I finally call out, "Hey, whatever you're doing, you're not supposed to be." And I get a response, at least in my head, telling me to get out of there. Now, I guess some of my survival instincts finally kicked in, and to be honest, they're not always the best at all times. Not again for the work I was doing, but that's another reason I left, but hey. So, I start walking back now, deciding that this is something I should probably tell the guys about, and not necessarily investigate alone. I mean, all we've got between me and the relative safety of our office building thing, well, not a building, but you know what I mean, is the water, and I'm not going to swim. That's when I see what appears to be the two figures I saw earlier, this time on the shoreline. Now I get a much better look at them this time, and this is pretty bizarre what I see. I can see they've stopped to look at me, and one's tall but the other's relatively small. They're dressed exactly the same. They have kind of like a weird half pointy hat on, and kind of not exactly a robe, but some kind of gown on, in a weird black but waxy outfit. It's different from what the mannequin was, but they don't say a word. I call out and do a big Y symbol with my hands trying to get their attention, but this doesn't work. I have a weird feeling about this, and this is another weird thing. They both start walking towards me, literally into the water. They walk until they're about head height until they just stop, and seem to vanish underwater. Now, this only took about 10 seconds, and I decided I was going to wait them out, and finally they resurfaced again. Now both going in different directions. One is going towards our station place, and the other is coming more towards me. walking slowly along the shoreline. Now, I'm pretty confused here. I go around to look at that mannequin thing and it's still there, but I decide that it's probably best if I get away from whatever this is. Now, annoyingly, I have to kind of trek through some of the more foresty area to get back. I wait for a little bit just to figure out where they're going, and definitely one's coming towards me, but annoyingly it's kind of blocking off the safe route that I already come along. I decide that I am going to have to go through this much more treacherous area, but that's fine. I've got some pretty good boots for it. Now, for some reason, I didn't feel terribly under threat at this point. It's probably because the area was so nice, and it was quite a good sunny day, so I didn't feel too bad. The only way I can describe my feeling is like something was just way off, and I saw something I wasn't supposed to. Now, again, I don't always react with the best survival instincts, so I didn't have anything to arm myself. I just decided to pick up a stick. Funnily enough, it wasn't even a big one, but I guess I could have launched it at somebody if needed, and maybe they would flinch react and that would give me time to run away, so yes, this is the escape plan. Now, this scarecrow thing goes out of sight for quite a while, and I just stop. I think, well, why am I getting so scared of this? Is this really a threat? Or am I the ranger here? Who's in control of the situation? And I relax myself a lot more. Now, I'm stood like this for probably about 20 or so minutes, just really confused as to what to do. And I now realise that I was probably in shock a little bit, but at the time I didn't know that. I just thought I was dealing with the situation accordingly to what I could see around me. And now, as I'm standing there, I can hear something breaking through the trees. I think, God, what now? And I quickly take a step back and I manage to get behind a tree. And I then catch sight of it. I can see one of those things now. It's a smaller one, but where its face should be, it's wearing some kind of skull mask and it has black face paint on. Now, I'm telling you this because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I really couldn't. And what do I do in this situation? I get my stick and throw it as far as I can to try and distract this thing. And then it dances towards it, almost like a dog going after some kind of treat or animal, but literally dancing while doing so. I now have some real fear running through my bones, and I start making my way in the opposite direction. Now, I couldn't hear this thing, it almost just gone silent again, and whatever this is, person or God knows what, didn't seem to be following me, and I let my guard down a bit. I've now come to the conclusion that there's some pretty weird cult people out here, and maybe they're trying to get me, and maybe, just maybe, I've come across some kind of crime scene they don't want me to know about. So, I have to start making my way now tediously around the lake to try and get to relative safety, and my mind slips. I completely forget about the other one. Now, I make it probably about halfway across to the relative safety and where I have a truck, but I hear something up ahead of me again. This time it sounds much more forceful and quick, so I quickly duck down. I laid there for probably a good 5 minutes until I lock eyes with it. It was an animal. I can't remember exactly what animal it was like a big rodent, but it slowly makes this merry way towards the water, and I kind of cursed myself a bit just for being so scared. I say, come on, you have to get a hold of yourself and get a grip now. Now what's especially bizarre is that's when I notice it, what appears to be a body floating in the lake. I now realise that this is that thing I'd moved earlier. It was now floating further across, and I observe it until it comes up on the bank again, and then I see it. That person goes to grab it, but they're assisted by another one, equally as tall as them. I now realise that there's at least 3 people here, They're dressed exactly the same, and they drag this over to the shore and leave it there. Now, I was really glued into the spot for quite a long time. I'd actually stared at this whole event taking place for so long that when I looked away, my eyes took a long while to adjust to not looking at bright things again. And it was almost like, I don't know what you call it, snow blindness, but I was pretty much experiencing a form of this, because I'd been staring at God knows what this was for so long now. And I'll take a deep breath, look around and realise that I'm gonna have to get myself out of here. Now, I'd actually gone off the path that I was on earlier, and I'm on a bit of a rough area a little bit, and it's not really good for crossing. I now know that I can take the long route to get back, and that's what I decide to do. I have to crawl across some areas and I'm probably gonna get wet, but that's kind of the least of my issues at this specific point. I can kind of go into one of the streams that actually feeds a larger lake that I've just come from, and I'm kind of doing like a military prone crawl around here. I don't know who these folks are, but for all I know there could be 100 of them out of here, and I'm on my own, so even though I'm not the smallest and I'm a little bit built, I really don't like my chances, and things like this really give me the heebie-jeebies, so yes, it's time to escape. Now, as I'm crawling, I don't hear anything. I still have another stick that I've picked up, and for some reason it made me feel a lot more safe. Maybe it's some kind of primitive thing and that's why cavemen always seem to have sticks, but in this specific moment that's what made me feel better and that's what counts. I wasn't that far away from safety, but I come up to the first kind of wetland area and I really feel a bit cold because of the water. I've also managed to scratch up my elbows and my belly and my knees a bit, and I'm now bleeding. I was a little bit worried about getting infected because it's quite dirty here, and you can imagine there's all kinds of bacteria and insects, and I hate both. I know some of you are probably asking, why did I do this job if I don't like those things, and I can't tell you that. I don't really know myself. But now, I'm not too far away from the relative safety of things that I know. I managed to come up to kind of like a clearing where I can actually see across to the lake. I'm pretty worried now that maybe they've followed me around but there's no one in sight. Now my own breathing was pretty heavy now, but then I hear another kind of breathing not too far away from me. This sounds like quite a heavy breathing, almost like it's being filtered through something. Not exactly like Fader's one, but maybe 10% similar. Almost like that you're wearing something over your face. Not a scarf, but like a plastic one. And I stop dead. I can hear this breathing, but I can't figure out where it's coming from. I know it can't be far away. It never seems to get closer though, and now I don't have the element of surprise because I cannot gauge it. I try my best to stay still and I feel my legs starting to shake, so I tense up my leg muscles and stop myself from shaking. Now this breathing does not stop whatsoever, and I'm now at a point where I must go forward to try and get to better things, and I decide that I should slowly but carefully crawl my way forwards once again. I decided that I wasn't going to stop crawling no matter what, and that's what I start doing. Now I realise that the breathing sound is slowly getting further away with each crawl that I make forward. I managed to get about 5 minutes further from this point and I can't hear the breathing anymore. I decide it's safe to look up, and that's when I see it. Some dark figure not too far off, but this time on the other side. That's when I can see it. There's burning. I try and figure out exactly where this thing is specifically, and I'm able to approximate it to where I saw that wetsuit thing before, or the farm figure, whatever it is. There's a very thick black smoke coming off of it. I'm quite worried now that there's going to be a forest fire, but it doesn't seem likely because it's close to the shore, but that raises the question, how did that fire start and why is it there? Now, I'm not sure what to do at this point, and I start crawling again. I'm not sure whether there's multiple fires or only one, but I know that I'm not going to stick around to find out. And I eventually crawl up to the point that I'm not too far away from the station now. I start to feel a little bit better, and then I feel it breathing on my neck. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this before, but my god, man, it's like somebody takes your soul. It's almost like your brain accepts, maybe it's some kind of prehistoric man thing, but it accepts that you've been captured and you have a second to make a decision. So, with my stick in hand, almost like it was second nature, I turn around and swing as hard as I can, literally with my eyes closed, and there it is, whack. I feel a sudden pain in my hand, and I realise that I'm bleeding. My hand's now wet. I realise that some of the stick has shattered and splintered into my hand, and that's when I see it. Somebody hits the ground with a large thud, and I can't make out a face, but they're dressed in some really weird kind of occultist outfit. It's like a weird dark robe, and then I get up and run. Now this person was pretty big, probably 6 feet and at least 200 pounds, but I couldn't stop to take in too many details, and before I knew it, I make it back to the station, and I actually take off my shirt to try and stop my hand from bleeding because I was worried I was going to bleed out. I quickly get in and scream on the radio for backup and help. While the radio's still on, I make a call out to the local fire responders and say that there's a fire here. I'm not sure what to do, so I quickly go to the kitchen area and get all of the knives and hide them away. I get the biggest one I can find and I grab that. I lock all of the doors and stay on the radio with my friends, who are also my colleagues here. They can't believe what I'm telling them, and apparently the fire people are going to get there first. I warn them that there's strange individuals out here, and they say they understand. It must have took about another 40 minutes though of waiting in agony before they finally get here. And once they do, I quickly point out to where the fire was. It's now gone out, and they say that they're going to investigate. Eventually a few others who work here also arrive, and some law enforcements too, and they say that they're going to take over the search from here. I give the exact location of what had happened, and one of the policemen who's first aid trained actually helps to get my hand patched up. I'd really hurt my hand, but luckily it wasn't broken or fractured, which is a good thing. Now, I ended up waiting in that station for quite a long time, until eventually the fire people come back first and say there's no signs of fire, just some ashes where something was burned. They said it was clothing, but they couldn't determine which because of the fire, but there was definitely no immediate threat, and that was a relief. That was my biggest fear. A beautiful place like this should not burn to the ground, and if there's one person that can stop it, I'm gonna make sure it's me. Now second, the police come back and say that they really can't find anyone, and they ask for an entire report of exactly what had happened. I give them everything, and they kind of doubt what I was saying, constantly saying, "Are you sure this is what happened?" And I say yes, and they start doing some weird things, like asking if I've taken any prescription drugs or anything. I say yes. How do you think this happened to my hand? And they say that they're going to keep some people stationed here and try and investigate until they find out what's happened. Now, eventually I got put to a different area. In fact, it wasn't even to do with the forest, it was actually on the admin side. Eventually I had to leave the job because I just couldn't bear the thought of going back there. Now, we were never able to find out exactly how many people were there, or what they were doing, or why they were there. And since there's no reports of similar events happening, I can only imagine that it was some kind of cults doing some really weird, I don't know, ritual or whatever they want to do out there. And maybe they were trying to capture me for some kind of human sacrifice or God knows what. I'm just very happy that I managed to stop at least one of those and give them a taste of their own medicine before they got me. Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today and enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon in the description for early access to my videos, and make sure you check out my podcast too, also in the description. I have a message before the video starts, so if you want to go straight to the stories, then there's timestamps in the description for that. So for today I'd like to share this. I think when you're dealing with your mental health and any issues you have regarding it, it's important to almost accept and be open to therapists helping, or helping at least identify what you have so they can give you further support or help. I think that's because if you're too close-minded and think you can get better with it yourself and just try and constantly think your way out of problems, it won't always work, because there's certain issues where if you do that you can actually make yourself worse, and it's something called ruminating, where your thoughts kind of spiral down and down. Because I know some people, if they have an issue, they'll think, oh, if I go and sit in a room for long enough, I'll think my way out of this. But most likely that's only going to make the issue worse and will get you into more negative thinking. If you find a good therapist, they'll be able to tell you almost exactly what you have and what you need to do, and it's honestly like night and day difference. A good analogy for it is that a good therapist will be able to tell you more about your mind than you understand currently. And I think it's important to realize that there's many, many years of research and development that's gone into this, and for getting better and understanding it's not always something you can just think your way out of. It's almost like they can figure out what's wrong, then just give you a massive book, speaking metaphorically, on how to get better instantly, and things that you might not have understood or discovered before. So I'm saying all this just to remind people that I think it's very important to be open-minded to the possibilities of therapists helping, and they might uncover something that you didn't realize you had and you thought was normal but could change your life completely. And remember too, like I always say, if you do find a therapist and it doesn't work out the first time, that's completely fine. It's normal to go through a couple before you find the right one, but the right one's out there and it could change your life. So I hope that can make a difference to someone, and I hope you all enjoy these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. I worked as a park ranger for a long time and still do. Now something happened to me when I was off duty one day that I can't really explain. I was doing a long road trip to go and visit some family out of state. It basically meant I'd be driving for a good few days, and luckily to keep me company I had my lovely Labrador. I absolutely loved this dog, well I still do. She was really my friend away from home and my friend at home, so I was happy to have my dog there with me. It also meant that along the way we could stop and go for really nice walks in the forest and whatnot. Now about halfway during the trip, I decided that I would stop off in another national park. I actually didn't cover this area as I was quite a long way from where I was stationed, but I was just really excited to be out there. I took my dog, grabbed the lead, and we head out, and I had lots of water with me, remembering that my dog could get dehydrated really easily. So we go for a nice 10-minute walk and eventually stop by a lake. I have to stop my dog jumping and going for a swim, which is really funny because honestly it's like a bat out of hell trying to get to the lake, but I don't know what's in the water, and I don't really have a good way to dry my dog, so I decide not to. We go back to my car and we continue onwards once again. It's starting to get quite dark and I'm actually feeling really tired suddenly. You know, like you can sometimes randomly just out of nowhere when there's no reason for it. There wasn't really anywhere good to pull over, so unfortunately I had to just stop at the side of the road, away from bends or anything, but onto a nice little clearing that was surrounded by trees. Now, the night come very quickly and it was a little bit cold, so I was happy to have my dog there too to help keep me warm. I'm just laying there thinking about the things that I'm going to do when I get back to my family, and I suddenly hear a very loud thud sound. I can't really describe exactly where it was in terms of proximity, but it made me jump, and my dog woke up because I jumped, but the dog was none the wiser. Now, the second that I got up, I suddenly hear a screeching sound. It's enough to make me freeze in place, and then another. Now this is literally like a banshee screech. It starts out in front of the car, then behind it, then to the left and right, sounding like it's coming from the forest. My dog is absolutely terrified, whimpering next to me, making a strange, scared sound that I've never heard it make before. Now, I'm absolutely frozen with fear. I look around desperately trying to look for the source of the noise, but I can't see anything. I grab a flashlight, quickly piercing it through the inky black tree line, and again I see nothing. And just like it started, it stopped. I can't hear it whatsoever. I quickly grab my dog, we get back into the driving seat, and I floor it out of there. I ended up driving through the night and stopping early outside of my relative's house, deciding to sleep in the car there. The next morning, I decided not to tell anyone about what had happened because I thought they wouldn't believe me or would think that I'd gone insane, but even my dog still seemed a little shook up for the next couple of days. I have no idea what could have possibly made that sound or why it was in all directions. I would usually think that, I was probably just delirious from sleep, but no, my dog heard it too and was equally as paranoid and terrified as I was. I want to know what made that sound. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion party pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay long because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on dirt roads, with dense brushes on trees on either side. The real creepy ones that you see in movies, really. So anyway, I'd been driving about 45 minutes when I was starting to get really tired. You know how sometimes you suddenly become really tired out of nowhere? Well, yeah, that happens to me. I knew I wasn't going to last. I didn't come across any place that I felt I could park and sleep safely. Anyway, it becomes clear to me that I wasn't going to find any place to pull up, and my tiredness isn't going anywhere. I did something questionable. I pulled over to the side of the road onto the grass behind some bushes and tried to hide my car from anybody else who was going to see it driving past. The roads weren't empty, and I would come across another car basically every few minutes. I made a mental note that the time is 11:22, and then I sleep. Sometime later, I'm awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock, 11:50. The sound then stops for a few seconds, and because I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply fall asleep again. I was later woken by the same sound. It's now 12:40. This time, I was really freaked out because the sound doesn't stop. The thought ran across my mind that it was an animal inspecting my car, but why wouldn't it stop? It's been an hour. I look in the rearview mirror and just managed to catch the glimpse of something as it ran into the forest. Now, at this time, I thought it was the damn hook killer. You know, the one that basically scratches on the couple's car, then slaughters the guy who gone out to investigate. Nah, not me, I thought to myself, so I got the heck out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I come around it, there's a car parked right off the side of the road with the door open. I slowed down just to see if anyone's in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anything. All of a sudden, a guy comes bolting out of the corner screaming, "Hey you, get out of my car, come here now." I get out of there and sped off as quickly as I can, and I never saw that guy again. To paint a picture, our stand was near the bottom left of this acre of land, and we have 2 acres visible, our right in front of us and another to our right, which was mostly visible from the tree stand. It was about 2 or 3 hours into waiting for some deer to show up. We had heard a lot of different animals like turkeys, foxes, and all kinds of birds, and lots of squirrels. It's very exciting for me. Eventually, at the opposite end of the acre, a small deer comes out of the tree line. I had my gun ready, but my uncle signals to me to let it go. He later explained that it would be an extremely hard shot even for him, and also the deer was small. So, I just watched this cute deer march away. It leaves with its tail wagging. Now my uncle and I shared a smile. I was so surprised that our tree stand really worked. And bam, out of nowhere, a bear lunges from the brush and absolutely annihilates the deer, dead instantly, and pulls it back into the brush. All that motion and power took less than 3 seconds. I was in absolute awe. Even replaying it in my head now, I still think to myself, what the heck? I was shocked and terrified while also simultaneously being amazed and excited. My uncle, though, had the classic look of fear, probably because I was so young and was there with him, but it was jarring regardless. Not only are bears extremely rare in my area, but the fact it was huge and was patrolling around or hiding unseen and unheard to either of us was just insane. I think about 30 minutes later, my uncle decided it's time for us to leave. We got down and packed up our gear into the bed of his truck. He starts it up and I'm walking around the backside taking my time. Stretched out and let that sun hit my face and cool air in my lungs. I don't remember exactly why, but my eyes are fixated on one area. As if my brain knew it was seeing something that it wasn't fully processing yet, and suddenly, the mood changed in the air. I sense something is wrong and start to turn around and walk to the back passenger door, but I didn't take my eye off this part of the train line. Just before I got in, that same bear pokes his head out and stares. It was far away, but I could tell its mouth was covered in blood. It's just staring at us. I closed the door and continued to look at it from the back window. My uncle noticed it as well. We're now both just scared. I've never seen anything like it before or since, but it was a really good lesson in trusting to understand that your instincts can be right. So I was about 5 at my grandparents' house, which was pretty rural, surrounded by woods and farms. It had just got fully dark out, but they had a few lights in their yard, and I was just bopping around doing whatever kids do. This would be around 1998 to 99 in Texas. I wandered over to the far edge of the yard, right outside of where the lights could reach, under one of those big trees, and something in that tree growled at me like I've never heard before. It was 15 feet up in the air and it didn't sound like a dog. I remembered freezing and being too scared to move for what felt like a long time, but was probably just a few seconds. And then I backed up a few feet before I turned around and freaking sprinted across the yard to my porch as fast as my legs can go. It wasn't a good idea. I don't know how it didn't chase me and rip my throat out. I ran in and told the adults there's a jaguar outside because that's what it sounded like, but no one believes me. About 10 years later, my dad is telling me stories about growing up in that house and how at night in the summer you'd hear the streaks of mountain lions that migrated up the creek behind the house every year. Now I'm 100% convinced that the growl was a mountain lion trying to keep me away from that tree for whatever reason. Maybe there's a cub with it, or food or something. Someone recently hit one with a car not too far from there, so they are definitely in that area. So, a buddy and I went hunting over a long weekend a few years ago. We hiked into the hunting terrain and stayed in a tent. This is in the middle of nowhere in the Norwegian wilderness, and we had exclusive hunting rights to this area, so we didn't think anyone would be around. We have no cell service within something like a 5 to 6 kilometer radius and something like 10 kilometer to our cars. Now we camped over next to a small lake and didn't see any people there for the first couple of days. On our last night there, we were eating dinner next to our campfire pretty late at night, so everything outside our immediate surroundings is pitch black. Now suddenly, we heard somebody take a shot on the other side of the lake. It sounds like a rifle. We thought this was a bit strange since there shouldn't have been any other hunters here, but we just figured somebody was messing around. We forget about it and go back in to eat. Another 10 minutes or so later, someone took a second shot, which sounded much closer. This time, the bullet hits rocks behind us, like 5 meters or so. We both freeze and just look at each other. And then there's another shot, and we're pretty sure our tent's hit. We obviously had no idea who did it or what to do. We couldn't call the cops since there's no cell service and it's completely dark, so we couldn't really hike out there without using flashlights, which seems to be a terrible idea. We ended up finding a downed tree with a little cave-like thing under the roots. We sat there until the morning. We then packed up as soon as possible and basically ran to the cars, where we called the police. The police took it pretty seriously, it seemed like, but nothing ever came out of the investigation. We really, even to this day, still have no idea what happened or who could have possibly done it. This was absolutely bizarre, with no reason for anyone to be out there with a gun, unless they are poachers, which is almost unheard of in Norway. I've never been so scared in my life, and it definitely took me a few years before I went back. Now, I was pig hunting in the bush in NSW in Australia. Me and my mate were stalking 2 pigs merrily, degrading a riverbank. Anyway, we make our way downwind and are totally still, and about 30 meters away in the brush, about to take our shots with a 308s, the 2 pigs absolutely bolt away. We literally just stand up and shake our heads, having no clue what scared them like that. I've never seen a pig go from 0 to full flight without at least hearing a gunshot. Anyway, we were pretty annoyed and decided to pack it in. Just as we're basically on our walk back through some pretty thick wood pine, maybe 100 feet away from where we are, we hear a growl. I swear to God, it sounded like a lion from Africa. There is nothing in Australia that should make that sound, nothing at all. I've never been so scared in my whole life. Then I realise no birdsong nearby, and it's pretty close to evening. So we stood still for 5 minutes, rifles out in the falling light, with no birds, before we decide that we have to head back to the trail and get back to where I parked my ute. About 30 minutes walk in the dusk, rifles out, jumping every time we hear something. I still don't know what the sound was, but I will never forget how primarily afraid of it I was. Like, evolution had programmed us to stay long away from things like this. I'd been out all day since about 3 AM and was heading back to the truck. All day, I had the feeling of being watched. All day. I don't see anything. I was walking up a draw that had a small cliff on one side, and that feeling of being watched really intensifies so intensely that I'm worried about having a heart attack or stroke or something. I stopped and looked around, and I saw her calmly sitting on her haunches at the top of a cliff just watching. She didn't blink, she didn't look away, just stared, and I stared back. I don't know how long that we stood like that. It was a mountain lion. It felt like a very long time, and I know that the sun moved a decent amount. Now eventually she stood up. We stared for a long while, and then she just turns around and disappeared. Now, I never saw her again. I was out hunting and heard somebody screaming in the woods. At first I thought it was an auntie trying to scare game away. As I listened closer, I could hear it was help. Went towards the sound and found a first-time hunter who was lost. He's in total panic, red in the face and all sweaty, still yelling even though I was standing next to him trying to calm him down. This is in early December, about 3 in the afternoon. It gets dark at about 5 at this time of year. It was cold and snowing. His phone died, he had no flashlight, no way to start a fire, thermal blanket, map, compass, food, water, nothing. The scary part is thinking what would have happened if I didn't hear him. I walked him a couple of miles to the nearest road and he used my phone to get a call to go and get a pickup. Okay, this is 100% true. So now I'm 23 years old and this happened about 10 years ago when I was 13 or 14. I used to basically skateboard all of the time, pretty much literally. I absolutely loved doing it. Now, all the time I would go with my friends Tim and Brandon, and one day when we got done skating, we decided to go to a 7-Eleven to go and get some food or drinks before going home. Remember, I was only 13 or 14, so we weren't driving. We had skated to the 7-Eleven and were planning on skating/walking back home. Anyway, we buy our drinks and we left the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit and prepared to cross the highway. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red so we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps and I noticed a 40 or 50-year-old man pumping gas into the truck while staring at me. Now, he stared at me and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight to my friend and I. He missed us, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend Brandon screamed, "What the hell?" as the man basically peels out really quickly. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch or something because he managed to get to the 7-Eleven parking lot and he comes around and tries to run us over again. This is where it got bad. All three of us started running at full speed across the highway towards the local library, which is really about 2 or 3 blocks from the 7-Eleven. When we were about half a block away, I looked back and saw the maniac speeding towards us full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors and I ran towards the woods. It was a Sunday, so I knew the library's closed and there was a trail in the woods which led up to my backyard. Meanwhile, this maniac is basically peeling into the parking lot, hopping out of his truck. I look behind me and, before escaping into the woods, I see him grab either a shotgun or crowbar. I'm pretty far away at this point, so I can't really see it that well, but it's from the back of his truck. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbour Tim's dad told me to get into his car because he had to go back to the video store, which is where Tim's mum worked. When I got there, I found Tim and Brandon and 3 cops. A minute later, my mum came in crying her eyes out because Brandon and Tim told her they didn't know if I lived or not. Everybody thought that I was captured. Tim told me that he saw the guy running after me into the woods, which is scary because I thought the maniac was chasing them, not me. Anyway, he was never caught and I spent the next 5 years worrying whenever I saw a white truck again. So north of Atlanta deer hunting, I headed to WMA in northern Georgia. I only had a short time to scout the area, but I had a basic, inexperienced plan to go in early and follow a game trail to where it looked like it crossed a river. My plan was to sit quietly until the early morning deer began to move. I arrived at around 4 AM and got my basic gear loaded and began my hike to the game trail with no light except a headlamp. When I got to where a few gem trails converged near the river crossing, I looked for cover and found an old rocky foundation and some kind of sketchy rocks and brush put together, but it was enough to provide ample cover. I set up inside and roughly formed an area provided by the rock and vegetation where I can set up nice. After about 90 minutes, it was legal hunting hours. I continued to wait, but as the daylight got brighter, I noticed a lot of things around me. I was working as a lineman at the time and I noticed the yellow tape tapered down on the ground in a few places. The area was very wet and the yellow tape is covered in dirt and mud. It was similar to the tape that we use to keep people out of hazardous areas and off our trails when they're in use. I noticed the remnants of paint on the ground, nearly missing lines, similar to what was left when underground utility locates were painted weeks ago. About 7:45 AM, I hadn't seen a single sign of deer movement, so I decided to move a bit further in. As I get up, I realised I was sitting in what appeared to be a small stone area built as a hut or fort or cabin of some kind. The ground had a thin slab and the stone was piled up marking walls. Some were knocked down ages ago, but some were in decent shape. I walked up to the road that was about 100 feet from where I was sitting. When I got to the road, I saw a display of colourful objects. I walked over and it was a 3-foot by 4-foot tall pile-wide area of stuffed animals. It had been raining all week and so these were soaking wet, covered with splashes of dirt and whatnot, looking very nice. Affixed to a tree above the stuffed animals was a barely legible sign that was streaking in the rain. It was a memorial of somebody who had been murdered in these woods. My mind raced as I realised the tape on the ground was a police line, and the paint was likely designated to where the body may have been recovered. I was kneeling in the exact location of a murder scene, or at least where a body was recovered. Hunting was over for the day, and I literally had random shivers for hours. This is a story my aunt told me years ago. My auntie and her family lived in a very rural area and backwoods part of Lincoln County, West Virginia. She said that her father would go fox hunting periodically. He and other men would travel up into the mountains to their camp. There, they would let their dogs run and chase foxes and spend the evening talking about different things and telling stories to themselves. My aunt had siblings. Many siblings, which isn't really uncommon back in the 1950s backwoods, WV. Now, her mother decided that she would walk with several of her youngest children up to her husband's, my aunt's father's camp. My aunt was one of the party. She said that they walked a long way back up onto the mountain and spent a few hours relaxing and spending time with her dad. The group had such a nice time there that they didn't realise that it had gotten so late. My aunt's father gave his wife a lantern in order for her kids to be able to see on their long journey down the mountain. As the group left, the lights from Fox Hunter's camp eventually faded out of sight as they walked down on the mountain. Her mother notices a small ball of light about the size of a softball coming down the mountain behind them. Thinking it was her husband needing something, she and the children stopped on the trail to wait. As they stood there, the light slowly made its way down the path and into better view. My aunt said that the closer it got, they could see that it wasn't a lantern, but a ball of light floating about 3 feet from the ground. She said once her mother realised this, she put the children in front of her and told them to run as quick as they can down the old trail that was cut into the mountain. My aunt told me that they ran as fast as they could down the hill. She said that the faster they run, the faster the ball of light went. My aunt said that they finally got to their home and ran inside and locked the door. According to my aunt, they're all terrified and finally got the courage to go look out the window, and they can't see anything. For some information about me, I am American. I was born in America, but my father's from Norway, so that means that I spend half my time in America where I work as a park ranger, and whenever I get a chance I love to go back to Norway. Specifically, I live in a place called Bergen, which is really beautiful. Well, half live there should I say. Now in America, I live in a state that has beautiful national parks and forests everywhere. It's my favourite place to be. Now there was one particular time about 10 years ago that I was back in vacation in my lovely Norway, and I was having a really good time visiting my friends and relatives. Now, a friend of mine was asking many questions about my job in America and what I have to do for this. He just said he finds it fascinating and it would be a job that he'd love to do. He kept on going on about it, so I said, "Hey," and my friend's name, "why don't we go out to a hike one day and maybe go camping together?" He absolutely loved the idea and jumped up for it. Now, we decided that it'd be best if we went camping, but we would just hike out to the area first to get an idea of where we wanted to go and to see how my friend was being out there in the cold. He again was very excited about this, and so we picked a date and set off. Now, the area we went to is truly picturesque. There was snow falling everywhere, and you could see that the tracks hadn't been trodden very much by other people. We started off in an area that's pretty well travelled, meaning you can see other people have been here before, but none today at least. My friend said that for someone who's lived in Norway most of their life, he really hasn't been out in nature enough, and I laughed and agreed, and we just talk about life generally, and he has lots of different questions for me. I decided that it'd be a good idea if we walk off onto one of the paths that actually goes away from where most people travel. The trees are a little bit more lower hanging now, and you have to be careful not to walk into things, but I say that I'm going to lead the way, and my friend is really happy and excited to see everything. There's some snow falling off the tree, which kind of makes it look like there's snow falling to your left as we enter, and it's truly beautiful. We have to duck down for a little bit, which kind of hurt my back because there's some fallen trees that we pass over, and we have to be careful not to get wet because we don't want to get cold out here. Surprisingly, you can see that somebody's been on this track before, which is quite interesting because I've actually been on here before and not encountered anyone. Not to worry, we continue ahead and eventually make it towards somewhat of a clearing with a beautiful stream that runs next to us. My friend keeps on talking and talking, and I remind him that he's got to keep up some of his energy because we've got the hike back, and we both laugh about it. We decide to stop for a while and stand next to the stream. My friend keeps on commenting how beautiful it is and how quiet it is out here, and I tell him I really know, and this is why I love my job so much when I'm in America, and he has lots of different questions about it. He does ask me what's anything scary that's happened to me being out there in nature before, and I say, well, not too many things really, but there's one story that I shared with him that I'd like to share with you all briefly. So, I was stationed out in my area that I have to cover, and everything was normal. I was just doing one of my regular patrols. Now, while I set out, I kept on getting a report of a truck driving round, and it 100% should not have been. That's because we were permitted to drive in certain areas and nobody else was, so we knew that somebody was up to something. There was a chance that somebody was hunting games who wasn't supposed to be over there, and that didn't sit well with us, so I was keeping an eye out for this. Almost expecting to find nothing, I'd let my mind drift to elsewhere, actually thinking of Norway and coming back on this trip at the time. Now, I didn't see much of anything for the first few days, until eventually I did see a truck, and I thought, this is interesting. Thinking it was one of the other rangers' trucks, I didn't think too much of it, and it turned out that was the case. It actually was. I continue onwards, and I don't think much of it. I actually forgot about it for a couple of hours until I see the same truck once again. It's very similar to our ones. That's when I realised that it's not actually one of our trucks, and I'm somewhat annoyed at myself for not checking earlier. I can see somebody sitting in it, and they have a hat which is similar to ours, so I just presumed that maybe it was one that I haven't seen before, and that maybe it's just my mind playing games with myself. I decide that it's good if I go and investigate, and at least then I can put a decent report in and solve this thing and get back to more pressing issues. I can still see somebody sitting there, so I call out to them and wait for a couple of minutes, but there's no response. Thinking this is strange, I'm worried that something has happened to one of my fellow rangers, so I quickly go to talk on the radio, but stop, thinking if somebody's passed out and they need medical help, I'm not going to be much use if I'm just talking over a radio. So I slowly make my way over. Now something seems different. I don't know how to describe it. The lighting wasn't the best due to the covering of the trees, but something just appeared wrong with this situation. I decided to remain still for a while. This person definitely wasn't moving, and it didn't look like they were breathing, which made me panic a little bit. I now jogs over and I realise something's off that stops me dead in my tracks. This isn't a person at all. It's a mannequin wearing almost an exact replica of the hats that we wear. Confused, I take a step back for a moment and look around trying to see somebody or anyone, but I can't find anything. I then radio in what's happening, and there's going to be another ranger who's going to check it out with me. I looked around the car to see if there was any signs of any other life, but there's literally nothing. Eventually backup arrives and I ask permission to open the truck and see what's happening. And it's granted, they just say proceed with caution. Now I actually put something in my hand to open the door just in case somebody put like a small blade or something under the handle. I really didn't want that happening. So I hesitantly go and open the door, and weirdly, lots of the console's been ripped out of the car. You can see this thing's basically been gutted and there's no way that it's going to drive anywhere. There's nobody else around, and I decide to pop the trunk. I pull the lever that pops the trunk and nothing happens. I then go round the back and me and my friend pry it open basically, and weirdly, there's a large teddy bear wearing another ranger hat there staring back at us. Worried that maybe there's a bomb or something, we decide to suddenly sprint back at least 40 meters and call in some law enforcement to figure out exactly what this is. We waited for a good 2 hours before the police could actually arrive to give us some help, just because we're really out of the way and apparently actually got lost upon arrival. When they do arrive, they seem very suspicious of everything and wondered whether it was somebody really trying to have one over on us, but we think otherwise. They very cautiously prodded around and realised there was no bombs or explosives or anything, because truly this was looking like something out of some kind of movie. They gone over to the mannequin and took the hat off, and everything was as it seemed. They have no idea how the truck actually got here though, because there was no tracks around leading up to the thing, so how it got there is really beyond me, truthfully. Now, they did dust over everywhere, but strangely, they couldn't find any fingerprints whatsoever other than our own, where we had investigated. And it was one of the weirdest things that happened to me. How anyone or anything could have got the truck out there is beyond me. It would have A, made too much noise, or B, 100% left evidence, but C, there was nothing to actually get it there. There was no engine, so obviously it didn't come on its own power. Maybe, just maybe, it was a UFO that done it, but who knows. But why was there a mannequin in there? Why did it have the hats to accompany it, along with its friend in the boot? I won't know. I don't think I ever will, but it really scared me for a while. After sharing this with my friend, it was safe to say that he was very scared now, and pretty hesitant to actually go on. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have told you that, I said to my friend, and he laughed and says, "No, I'm just kidding, buddy. I'm fine. Let's press on." And we continue onwards. Now this part of the walk in the snow is again absolutely beautiful, and we're now approaching much larger trees. We get up to the bridge and we're just talking generally, and my friend keeps on asking me different questions about what's the most scary thing that's happened to me just in the woods generally. And I tell him that I've got one more story to share with him, but let's just appreciate how nice it is here first. And we continue onwards. Now my friend stupidly gets very close to the edge of the bridge and the beams aren't very high, and he kind of half slips in but luckily slaps the ground and kind of stops himself. I'm not sure how he done it, but it's definitely a good thing because I can't be bothered to drag him over to safety. To my left I can see a beautiful stream, and this shoots off from the one that we're just on, and we continue up to a bigger bridge. I tell my friend, hey, please don't fall in this time, seriously. If you go in, I'm not going to be able to get you out easily. He laughs and continues very hesitantly. If you're going out on long hikes, especially in the snow with people that don't really go out in the outdoors often, it can be quite dangerous for them, and normal situations can sometimes become life-threatening. And that's what my friend was doing. He seemed so up for coming out here at first, but it's almost like now that he come out in the cold, he was having second thoughts and 100% didn't want to be here with me. But that was fine and to be expected, I guess, and at least we wouldn't have to do the camping trip now. So we continue on. We keep moving up some steps and are now moving uphill, and my friend keeps on pestering me about my other strange forest story. I tell my friend that if I share this story with you, then please don't get too scared to not go on, because you seemed pretty scared before, and he laughs and says, yeah, don't worry, I won't. I say fine, and I start telling him my other story. Now this one is from my childhood. This one again was actually in America and not over here, and was on a beautiful summer's day. On this particular day, I hung out with a group of friends. Now, all of us like to go out into the woods together. Now mind you, we were very young, and we did live in quite a safe area, so our parents didn't have that much of a problem with us doing this, and we like to play a game called Manhunt. Now for those of you who don't know, basically there's somebody who has to hunt, and the others have to hide. So Manhunt, as the name suggests, except we were much younger to be considered men. So basically the person who's gonna look for everybody else counts up to about 100, then shouts out manhunt and runs around looking for everybody else. It's kind of silly thinking of it now, but at the time it was great fun, and we actually used to play this in school together, except the point that we'd all start at was basically just a bin, like the one you'd throw rubbish in. But on this particular day, there was another person there, so there was 4 of us in total plus this extra one. Nobody really seemed to know much about this other person. Apparently he was just playing on his own before, and some of the other group decided to invite him along. His clothes seemed somewhat different to all of ours and were actually a bit more dated than what we were wearing, and we didn't think too much of it, I guess just because we're quite young at the time. So we continued onwards, and he didn't really say too much about himself or why he was there, just that he'd only moved there recently. So I was one who had to go out looking for everybody. That was in the first game. All of the other kids run off, including the new one, and I start counting. Now of course, I start counting very slowly, like I guess you're supposed to as a kid. And then I start very quickly once they can't hear me anymore. I probably did maybe 30 seconds of counting in total, but I think everybody else did. But I don't know, I had to win this game, you know? So I look out calling manhunt while I head off. Now I decide to run very quickly for the first few seconds, and funnily enough I found one of my friends instantly. He was basically hiding behind the tree next to the exact position that I'd started in. I laugh because he always does this, and I don't know why he never caught on to the fact that I would immediately find him. But I think he couldn't really be bothered to hide much, so I kind of respected that about him. Now in our version of Manhunt, we're able to use the new people that we found as a part of the hunting squad. Obviously that makes the game have increasing difficulty over time, and we set out trying to find our other friends. I decided that I had to go back to go grab some water, and I asked my friend that I've just found to go on further. I head back and I can't believe it. Almost exactly in the same position as I caught the other friend, there's another one. I laugh and say, come on, couldn't you have found a better spot than that? And my friend then joins the search. Now, after not long, we find the other friend, so now there's only one more left basically. So that means that there's 3 of us searching, with the 4th just joining us, meaning that there's only one person left to find, the new friend. Now, in this first game, I was the one looking for everyone, like I said, and in the second I was going to be hiding, so I was more looking forward to that because I just find it more fun. Now, all of us met up and said we don't know where that new person's gone, and we actually got a little bit worried, thinking imagine if we lost someone on the first day that we met them, wouldn't it be funny? So we head off in different directions, all of us looking for the same new person, not really knowing his name, which actually makes finding him far harder. We searched and searched for what seemed like hours, what was probably only a number of minutes, and we couldn't seem to find him. We basically searched a very wide area, which is pretty much as far as you could search, and looked over every possible place that he could have been hiding in, and we couldn't find him at all. Thinking maybe he pulled a quick one on us and had just escaped back home, we decided that we shouldn't look much further, and think maybe he's just a bit weird and that's why he ran off. So all of us meet up again and decide what to do, thinking we should probably go home, but we should tell our parents that he might be lost out there, hoping maybe they know him. He also shared with us roughly where he lived too, so we knew we basically had to go back to our neighbourhood, then just down one road we'd be able to find his house, so that's what we do. We start walking back, and we're still looking for this person, but we can't find them literally anywhere. It seems like no matter where we go, this kid is gone, so we just get back to our parents. We then go towards one of the houses who lives closest, and start talking to the mother there. We explain our game and say that we've met a new friend, but they've gone lost in the forest and not to worry about it. And as you can imagine, this mother, like any mother should do, got extremely worried and said, "Who is he? What does he look like? How long's he been out there for?" and goes to sprint for the phone. We all look a little bit worried, thinking that we're going to be in big trouble now, and the mother seems very annoyed that we can't give many details. She then said, "Where does he live?" and we explain and say the exact house that he's come from. The mother now puts the phone down and says, "Show me where. I mean exactly where this house is." And we go off to show her, and exactly as it was described, near the neighbourhood, then down a long road. We follow the mother down this road, and she seems to have some kind of energy, not like it's angry, but kind of like a scared energy, which is quite hard to describe unless you've seen it. That's when we realise that this road leads to where a house used to be. The house is basically half ruined now, and there was a large fire many years ago. I mean 50 years before our time. But it's weird because this is literally the exact spot that he said he lived in. And when the mother realises this of one of the kids we're with, she goes very strange and almost looks like she's seen a ghost. She says, "Just go back, it's fine, I'll deal with this." And we all go back home, and I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until a number of years later that I learnt apparently there used to be a young child that lived there and a family, and unfortunately he went missing after a fire that happened to burn the house down, and the family had never seen him since and eventually moved out of state. As I told my friend this story, he basically looked like he'd just seen a ghost too, and I understand why. I'm pretty convinced that what we encountered was some kind of recurring ghost that, is kind of like a lost spirit out there. It's just going through the same thing again and again and never leaves, and it really made me believe in the paranormal. So anyway, my friend is now very scared, but I assure him that nothing's gonna happen and that we should just continue on our little hike, and he's much more quiet now, which I guess for me is quite a good thing really, because I actually was a little bit annoyed that he kept on asking me things and I couldn't really enjoy my time too much. So anyway, We continue on the hike, and the cold Nordic air is starting to pierce through our clothes a little bit because we've been static just talking, and I know now that we should probably head back. So we start our walk, and we go past the same tree that had blocked us before that we had to duck under. We come up to the same bridge again, and we just start talking about different things now. Now we're actually both quite tired, and I decide that it's going to be a good idea if we stop for a little while and drink some tea. I have a couple of biscuits and other things with me, which basically are a lifesaver when you're out here and starting to feel cold. So we have a tea break, and we're just relaxing generally. While we're drinking the tea, I can hear laughter, and I tell my friend to knock it off. It's not like his normal laugh, and I haven't said anything funny. It's kind of like a maniacal laugh, but more animalistic. My friend looks at me, still with tea in his mouth, and I realise something's up. For the next 5 seconds, we hear a cackly kind of laugh just off in the distance, echoing off of the valleys around us, which is extremely bizarre. A, because we've not seen anybody whatsoever on our trip, and B, because why would there be laughter out here like this? Maybe it was some animal that we hadn't seen. We both agree that it's probably an animal, but it seems really bizarre. Unfortunately, it's basically the only path we can take to get back to civilization, and we don't really have the option to go through the trees because the terrain's very treacherous beyond the path. So we decide to give it some time so whoever this maniac is can just get out of the way. We then decide that after a few minutes we should press on. I decide to take the lead, not because I was feeling brave, just because I didn't have a choice really, because my friend is basically frozen there. I keep telling him, come on, we've got to get a move on and just solve this and get back. I'm sure it's nothing, it's probably just a person, don't worry. And we continue down a small ridge. While walking down the ridge, we've realised that up ahead is a person. They're dressed in pretty much all black, but their clothes seem to be one piece, if that makes sense. So like they're wearing some strange overalls, and they're kind of gliding through the snow ahead of us. They're going pretty quick and keep disappearing over different hills and beyond the tree line. We decide to walk much more slower now just to let them go ahead. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but you know when somebody's acting a bit strange ahead of you, and if you slow down you can create distance? Well, that's what we're doing, and we decide to stop on another bridge. We finish off the rest of the tea, and we don't hear any more laughter this time, so we just start to crack jokes about who this person was or what they were doing, and I start pretending they were laughing at my friend for being so scared of the stories. Feeling more confident now, my friend walks ahead of me and actually leads the way back, which I was pretty impressed by. We're coming up to an area that has a little bit less snow now than before, but it's fresh set snow, so you can see where you've been. Now that's when we notice the first thing that seems odd. There's no footsteps here. Literally nobody's been here, no animal or anything, so that leads us both to have one question. Where did this person go? And how did they get there? Because we're both certain that we've just followed their steps, but there are none to follow. There's no animals, nothing. So we're both a little confused here, but think it's probably just nothing and we're just overthinking. I'm getting a lot more worried now, and we both continue on, cautiously. Now this part of the path actually opens up a lot more, and again, there's no signs of footsteps anywhere, which is really bizarre, because usually you should be able to track something in the snow if it's following your path, and whatever this person is, they were definitely following our path, or at least walking on the same one. And there's no tracks anywhere that you think a normal person would walk. That's when we're thinking maybe it's an animal. And there are actually some strange Norwegian folklore tales about these kinds of things, but I don't know, I never thought they were much more than just that, I guess, but maybe I was wrong. Now my mind flashes back to the time that I played with that ghost child and I started to get a little worried. From this specific point that we're standing, we can actually see a lot further ahead, and we both stop for a moment. You can just about make out some kind of black figure really far off, quite high up on not really a mountain but a high hilled area, kind of floating along the top. It's moving left to right very quickly, and we both look at each other again just to see if we're actually seeing the same thing. At first I thought it was a bird, but there's no wings flapping at all or anything. It's like almost as though you got something on a large cable dragging it left and right, but not moving like that. And suddenly, it disappears again over the ridge. Now, we're not sure what we've just seen, but we know it doesn't look right at all. Now we're a little bit worried. Once again, this thing is up ahead, basically in the exact position that we need to go to, but somewhat miles away almost. It's quite hard to describe, but it's like it's skipped much further ahead of us, but we can still see where it is roughly. We now walk even slower, very confused on what we're seeing, thinking maybe it's something that has a logical explanation. Maybe it's some kind of bag or even a kite or something stuck up in the trees that's just going back and forth. Maybe it's an animal in the trees that we're not sure about. But every step we take is further confirmation of the fact that this isn't what we saw, because there's nothing in the trees. Everything's so perfectly still and quiet. The only sound, if any, is random clumps of snow falling off the tree branches once they get too heavy. But none of the snow is disturbed. All of it remains undisturbed, so there's definitely something up now. Every few moments we have to stop and try and figure out what we're looking at. This goes on for a good few minutes, until we can see something just ahead of the bridge that we have to cross on. It's a black figure again. We both stare at it intensely and decide to duck down into the snow just to stay out of sight and hide behind some of the trees. We have to investigate this thing before it knows what we are, and in a prone position, I slowly crawl my way along the snow, trying my best not to be seen with my friend behind me. This thing does not move, I'm not kidding with you. It literally stays perfectly in its position, not even flinching at anything. I say to myself, God, what are we dealing with here? And what's worse is nightfall isn't really that far away. I continue crawling forwards on my belly, getting a little bit cold, until I've realised that this is just a tree. It's no longer alive, but God, it looked like that thing we saw before. Not sure if we just saw a tree or what to think. We both proceed somewhat cautiously, walking at a more relaxed pace now, thinking maybe, just maybe, there's something to explain all of this. We get closer and closer to it, and yes, it's just a normal tree with nothing to worry about. We stop for a moment and look up towards the ridgeline. There's nothing there. There's nothing in the trees. It's then confirmed in our minds that whatever we have seen is actually not this tree. If only it was that simple. And we press onwards. Now we're probably only about 15 minutes from where we need to get to be in the last clearing to get back to the car, and I'm starting to feel a lot more confident. We actually start to joke about what we've just seen, and I realise there's a path that we can take that's basically a shortcut. I explained this to my friend, and he's actually up for the idea, looking forward to getting back warm again and into safety. My friend agrees, and we both go to the right following this path. Now, as we're walking, my friend notices something that seems odd. There's kind of like a blur up ahead of us, just through the trees, the same height as the thing before, but different. We both then come to a stop, and it stops too. Okay, we're definitely looking at something now. It's almost like a disturbance in the air, if that makes sense. I look at my friend and he looks at me. I then look up at the sky and my friend nods at me. we have to get back before it's dark and gets too cold and treacherous. But that means we have to go up to this thing. Now we can actually see the exact area that we stopped at before when I told my first story, and it seems to be over there. I checked and I had everything with me, so I know it was nothing that I left there. But how could it be anything I've left there? This thing doesn't look normal at all. We start to proceed once again, very cautiously, as the silent snow falls around us. This thing is definitely set in place, and it's almost like a bit of distorted glass sitting there. We keep looking around periodically, checking that nothing's tracing our steps or following us, and luckily there was nothing. You can also see that the paths have been trodden on not too long ago, which is reassuring. But it's hard to say how long ago this was really. Maybe it's just from somebody who was walking through on a hike and gone back to their car, but I guess we won't know. So we continue onwards. We make it closer and closer to this thing, and that's when I realise there's another. There's two of these kind of like, I don't know how you guys would say, but maybe like blur just there, perfectly still. There's two large trees that I can use for cover, so I decide to slowly go up to this and poke my head around to investigate more. Again, looking at my friend to confirm what I'm seeing is actually real, he nods at me once again, and we realise that whatever this thing is definitely not moving, and it does have a friend. Thinking maybe it's a man-made thing, I actually relax a lot and start to proceed over to it. With every step I get closer to it, I feel more and more like I'm being watched, which is really bizarre because I didn't have this the whole time we were out here. Even during the time that we saw that other thing earlier, I did not feel like anyone was here with us. But why am I suddenly feeling so now? And I have this nervousness that I can't really shake, and it's something that I haven't experienced for a long time before. It's almost like a person standing there in front of me, but I can see through them. Maybe, just maybe, this is some kind of spirit or ghost that I'm confronted with. Maybe it's that young boy that I'd played with when I was much younger, coming back once again. I've heard about spirits following people, so maybe this is what it is, and he's got more friends to play manhunt with. I'm now feeling terrified and trying my absolute best to put on a brave face so my friend doesn't realise that something's wrong, especially because he's not used to being out here, so it's really up to me to be brave now. I now come within 6 feet of this, and it looks just like a person, but it's not. I now realise that there's a few more of them. There's two more to the left of this, then another one to the right. My friend then notices another one and points at it. I get closer and it's literally a big block of ice shaped like a person. It hasn't got many features and it almost looks like one of those old Bible depictions that you would see from hundreds of years ago, but carved out of ice, and it's not melted at all, but it is ice. And where are the footsteps? There's no footsteps around this thing. It's literally just like it spawned in or something. And this thing's really cold. You can kind of see some mist coming off the very top of it. All of them have slightly different configurations too, which I think is really bizarre. But there's nothing I can really put it to, or compare it to, if that makes sense. Now, this is by far the most surreal moments of my life. Even more bizarre and surreal than the moment that I had when I was a kid and I saw that ghost. This was completely different. It was while standing face to face with this thing, trying to figure out exactly what it is, that the feeling of being watched and being in the wrong place basically becomes unbearable. I look at my friend and say we have to leave, and he nods and we both face forward and start taking one step at a time. I can feel the adrenaline surging through my legs now, and I feel a little bit shaky. My friend takes one last look back and he stops me and grabs my hand. He squeezes it for me to look. I can just about see that figure once again, standing from the area that we just walked down from, just peering behind a tree very slowly, just enough for us to know that it's actually there, almost like it's doing it on purpose. At least I think that's what it is. I don't know if this is a person or not, but we both turn around and start sprinting. Now again, this is something I only noticed after, but there was no footsteps ahead of us as we continue onwards. We're sprinting for probably a good minute before we have to stop to go slowly over a bridge again. This doesn't make sense. This is not possible. We were there probably half an hour before, or maybe an hour at that, and there was literally nothing there. How on God's green earth could somebody have put those there without us realizing, and where would they have come from with it? We haven't seen anyone whatsoever, and where are the footsteps? It wasn't time to think about all of this, it was just time for us to get out of there and back to safety. While we're running, the feeling of being followed is unshakable. I glance behind myself constantly and I don't see that thing again, but to be honest, I was running so quickly and so scaredly that even if it was, I probably wouldn't have noticed. And when you're running and tired, all the trees look exactly the same, and it kind of just becomes like some big blur that you'll notice behind you. So we continue onwards and we eventually, thank God, make it back to the normal trail, and we don't have to go much further. We eventually get back to the empty car park with only our own one there, and we quickly jump in the car. I go to turn the ignition and it doesn't start. I think, God, is this truly how it all ends for me? I then try once again, and thankfully, the engine slowly comes to life. Now, annoyingly, we have to try and demist the window quickly before we can go, but my friend basically does this in a time that would make Usain Bolt jealous, and manages to get the thing cleared off really quick. We don't have much time to defrost the rear view one, and we peel out of there. I actually kind of lost the steering of the car for a second and thought we were going to crash, but luckily I managed to steady it and we're back on the road. Neither of us say a word to each other. We're just lost in our thoughts while we start making the 40-minute drive back to home. Now, I constantly look behind myself, half expecting that thing to be a spirit that's followed me in the car, or maybe in the bonnet, or maybe in the boot, who knows. I can't escape the feeling that we're being watched still, which is one of the weirdest parts about the drive back. We eventually make it back home, and luckily this part is uneventful for us. I drop my friend off at home, and we both look at each other and his wife says, "How was your trip?" He says, "Oh, it was great. It's too cold for camping." And he looks at me, and his look says 1,000 words. We both agree that we're not going to tell people about this, at least not now, and he heads off home. I then drive back home myself and get back to my wife, and she asks the same thing, and I basically said the same, and I head off to sleep. It's the next morning that I get a text from my friend saying, "Why were you standing outside yesterday?" And I don't know what to tell him. I say, "What do you mean? I just gone straight back home." And he immediately calls me, saying that he thought he saw me standing in his driveway wearing black, maybe just checking that I was okay and home safe. I told him, "Why would I do that? I already left you and knew you got home safe." And my friend immediately starts panicking, and luckily I managed to calm him down, saying it's probably just all in his imagination, but I don't know. I really don't know what to tell people about what happened, and I can only possibly think it's some kind of folk thing that's native to Norway that people have been saying about for hundreds or thousands of years, but I was one of the people that actually got to see it. Or maybe it was a spirit that was following me. I'll never know. But how those things got there and what that thing was following us, I'll probably never know until the day that I'm not here.